Call the meeting to order. Good morning. In our presence, we have Pastor Fred French to lead us in prayer. Please rise.
Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day and for the promise that if we lack wisdom, we can ask of you, and you will give it generously. You have said, ask and it shall be given, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened to you. So we ask for wisdom and guidance this morning. We thank you for these leaders who have taken up the responsibilities of public service, and we ask for your blessing on their diligence and the use of their gifts to deal with the decisions they need to make today for the sake of those you have put in their care. Thank you for Mojave County and all the blessings you've given us here. May we sense your presence and grace this morning. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor French. Supervisor Bishop, if you'll lead us in the prayer.
Yes. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our nation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Board of Supervisors may, by motion, recess into executive session to receive legal advice from the board's attorney on any item contained in this agenda pursuant to ARS-38-43103, portions A, 3, and 4. At this time, I'll call for a motion, action to call for an executive session to be held on June 19th, 2017 at 9 a.m. for discussion and consultation with legal counsel in accordance with Arizona Revised Statutes 38-43103, portions A, 3, and 4, to discuss items noticed on the agenda with an asterisk.
Chairman Watson, I'll make that motion.
We have a motion
Second.
and a second. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Motion carried. Clerk of the board, do we have Supervisor Johnson on board?
Supervisors Johnson, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. Thank you. Discussion of pending or contemplation of litigation claims and demands. Mr. Esplin?
Nothing to report, Chairman.
All right. Moving on to committee reports. Supervisor Johnson. Committee report?
No, I have nothing. I'll let you cover the WIR board.
Supervisor Bishop?
I have a couple things to report on. Last month, about mid-month, I was in Phoenix attending the CSA Small County Caucus, and I followed that by attending the CSA Board of Directors meeting the following morning. And then toward the latter part of the month, I joined hundreds of other county leaders, including Chairman Watson, across the western United States for the NACO WIR conference. And this is an annual event that brings together state, federal, and local leaders to discuss policy issues confronting all of the western states, this side of the Mississippi River, I believe. We discussed the strategic engagement of the U.S. Congress on issues critical to the West and attended a lot of different workshops of interest to the West. And then just wanted to report there was a large crowd that turned out on a seminar about public land planning efforts, and that was on the heels of the repeal of the Problematic Planning 2.0 effort. And we were able at that workshop to actually talk one-on-one with the representatives from BLM from Washington, D.C. So all in all, it was a busy month, and that's my report.
Thank you for your very complete report. Supervisor Moss?
Nothing, thank you.
And Supervisor Angus?
Nothing this morning, thank you.
Thank you. And I have nothing further to add to Supervisor Bishop's report. County Administrator's report?
I have no report today, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Approval of the April 17 and May 1st, 2017 Board of Supervisors regular meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion
Second.
and a second. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carried. On to the call of the public. Those wishing to address the board at the call of the public regarding matters not on the board agenda must fill out and submit to the clerk a call to the public request to speak form. They're located in the back of the room and need to be done prior to the meeting. Action taken as a result of the public comments will be limited to responding to criticism, referral to staff, or placing a matter on a future agenda. Comments are restricted to items not on the regular agenda, with the exception of the consent agenda, and must relate to matters within the jurisdiction of this board. I have first speaker this morning, an old protege of mine and a member of basketball team from years ago, Philbert Wadahamaji Sr. If you'll come down to the front, please. I'm not going to tell anybody how many years ago it was. Welcome, Mr. Wadahamaji. I believe you serve as the Vice Chair of the Wallapai Nation, is that correct?
Correct.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning to the board members and also to the members of the audience. My name is Philbert Wadahamaji Sr., and I'm currently the Vice Chairman of the Wallapai Tribe. And I'm a long-life resident of Mojave County. Went to school in Mojave County, graduated from what then was the only high school in Mojave County Union High School, back in 1965. So, you know, so that shows that I've been
I was
around
younger.
quite a bit. Yeah. Okay, with that, I'm here basically to let the board know how appreciative we are of their support of our water rights issue, which has been going on for, you know, for quite a long time. And I think right now we've got our foot in the door. And basically what we're after is that since we're right next to the Colorado River, I think we have a right to, you know, to get some of that water as you know, as Mojave County members and also as a member of the Wallapai Nation, that we, you know, feel that we, you know, are obligated to have some of that water. So again, you know, that's what I'm here basically to thank you all for your letter of support. And I don't know if you have any questions or anything regarding that. If not, you know, that's basically what I'm here for.
Thank you. Questions?
I just
Supervisor
wanted to
Moss?
thank you and the Wallapai Tribe for all you've done for the economic activity of Mojave County, Arizona. Thank you and your efforts.
Right, okay. If there's nothing else, you know, thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll continue our dialogues, you know, into the years, and hopefully we need to work together as neighbors, you know, on issues that involve our county. Thank you again.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Wadahamaji. Next person that would like to speak is Barbara Pope.
No,
No?
it was a mistake.
Mistake? That's fine.
Yes, sir. It was for item D.
Mr. Mark Schmedeke? Okay, thank you very much. Royanne Ortiz? Good morning. If you'll state your name and address for the record.
Thank you, Supervisors. My name is Royanne Ortiz. I live at 1550 Monte Vista in Bullhead City. And I wanted to bring up the issue of maybe sometime in the future, if it's all possible, I don't know that it's possible, that the Sheriff's Department for the county be treated as far as taxes go, the way you do, the way the fire department is and the school district is. In other words, that they're their own taxing authority. They have a community board that oversees them. And I think the reason it was done that way was because the schools and the fire department provide a benefit to everyone in the community, and I think that's probably true for the sheriff's department as well, considering they operate the jail, which covers the entire community for their services. So it's just a request of maybe sometime in the future, you might want to consider doing that if you have the authority. I don't know whether you do or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ortiz. Okay, that completes the call to the public. Move on to the consent agenda. The following items listed under consent agenda will be considered as a group and acted upon with one motion with no separate discussion of said items, unless a board member so request. In that event, the item will be removed from the consent agenda for separate discussion and action. Supervisor Johnson, do you have any items that you'd like to withdraw?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 31, 37, 39, and 41.
Thank you. Supervisor Bishop?
I have none to add to that.
Supervisor Moss?
Nothing to add.
And Supervisor Agnew? Nothing, and those items covered. Okay. Chair would accept a motion for the...
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
I'll move that we approve the consent agenda, accepting items 31, 37, 39, and 41.
We have a motion and a second for the acceptance of the consent agenda with the exception of 31, 37, 39, and 41. Any further discussion? There being none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? A motion carried. Move on to item 31. Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if we have somebody from staff, if Mr. Hendricks can answer the questions or we want to answer the questions, but I believe it says, or the way I'm reading it is, that we may carry over these hours. Is that correct?
Mr. Hendricks or?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Johnson, I had our HR department work fairly extensively, and if it's a pleasure of the board, I'd like to have Ken Cunningham come down and from HR and explain the issue. There, it is if he's not there, I'll take a good stab at it. That's correct. We looked at what the proposition said, 206, and it deals with temporary employees. What it talks about is that a temporary employee is eligible for a certain amount of PTO hours or sick time hours a year, and it also gives a jurisdiction some options on how we can handle that, and how if we allow if we place a ceiling on the sick time hours, then those hours are necessarily carried over. So we took a look at the. Okay. Ken, can you save me on this one? And I'll try to finish my thought. But thank you. That the county has some options, and we took a look at what we believed was best for the employee and what was best for the county, and how we could most easily manage this very complicated and cumbersome law that's taken effect. And Ken, if you could help me and dig me out of a hole, could you explain what we actually did?
My apologies to the board. I was just out of the room. This
Mr.
proposition.
Cunningham?
Yes, sir.
We have Mr. Cunningham.
Maybe I can short up, but my question is, does it say that we may carry over this time?
They're talking about the carrying over if we place a ceiling on the amount of sick time.
Right.
Correct.
Right. Well, what we prepared in our proposal is to carry over 80 hours. What the proposition states that any hours that we do not carry over, we're obligated to pay out at 100% of their base salary. So let's say that we pay out the 40 hours every year, we will give that employee 40 hours of pay. And then If we cash it all out, we're still obligated as of January 1st to give them 40 hours of sick time that they will be able to use from January 1st. So that's why we made a proposal to only carry over 80 hours. Then they could have hours on the books, and it takes away the obligation that we would have to upfront 40 hours of sick time or the paid sick time for the following year. So that's why.
I guess I'm reading it different. I thought in there it said that we may carry it over, you know, the 40 or the 80. It said 40 is all we had to carry. You're given 80, but it's really only 40, right? Is the minimum?
The 40 is the minimum, and it does say you may carry it over, but if you don't do the may, you have to cash it out. There's another section in there that says you may carry it over, but any hours you do not carry over, you have to cash out, which would mean that the employee...
Well, wouldn't it be a better deal for our employees? I mean, because that's kind of going against our people because we're not cashing them out every year on their time. I don't know why we're doubling the hours to 80 for the part-time people, but if we just said, hey, we're carrying over 40 every year, and once they reach the 40, if they continue to be a part-time employee, well, then all we do is, you know, if they ever get lower than 40, say they use 2 days off or something, they accumulate back up to 40. Wouldn't that make more sense financially for us?
Well, but those employees that, I mean, we're talking about temporary employees. I think we have less than 100 employees that this would apply to. If we go up to the 40 hours, it doesn't say that they don't keep accruing, so you can use your up to 40 hours. Then if we cash out the 40 hours or we don't let them carry it over, the second year, we're going to be cashing out 40 hours because not all of our employees have attendance or call in sick, a very small portion of our employees. So what this would also do is if we carry it over for the 2 years or, you know, the first year and then in the second year, it gives us a chance to prepare for that within our budgets. If we just do it immediately, our budgets just aren't prepared for that.
But these are sick days only.
Sick days
And
only.
usually sick days are paid out at a lesser amount in other corporations because it's there to help the employees out. It's not there to be a money-making tool. And so I guess what I'm asking is, would it be legal if the board decided to say, yeah, you can carry over 40 hours and, you know, we're just not paying it out? I mean, if we start paying this out, it's just not fair to our people. And I guess going off that, is that going to come back to what are we going to do with our regular employees now? Are we going to have a sick time base for them too where they can get paid out, or they just get screwed on the deal?
The paying out of the hours is not a choice. It's part of the Proposition 206. We have to pay that out regardless. Our current employees that accrue PTO, we comply with the law because we give more than what this minimum of 40 hours per week is. The PTO, currently, we cash out up to 300, 400, and 600 hours based on dates of employment and classification of employees. So we're not in violation of the policy. The only thing that we have to change on our current policy for our current employees is that first 40 hours of sick time cannot be held against that employee and the managers cannot deny it. Currently, our PTO policy says that the department head has a sole discretion of approving PTO time. Well, that's not going to be true, and we'll be bringing that up back to the board, but that first 40 hours of unscheduled sick time, we cannot deny that. And like I says, that is in the Proposition 206. We don't have much of a choice on this.
And then this will be the same as our employees. You can't use it until you accrue it, right?
That's correct.
That is how we're
Okay,
interpreting it, sir.
I guess the question I have for the board would be, I just think, you know, I don't believe we should double it to 80. I think it should be just the 40, whatever the minimum is. That was all I had, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Johnson.
Mr. Cunningham, can you explain to me why 80 is economically better for the county as opposed to 40? Because I'm following along with Supervisor Johnson's math, and I kind of agree with him.
Well, we chose the 80 hours is one, because if these employees within the 2 years, some of our temporaries stay for a long time. The library has a lot of long-term temporary employees. A lot of our temporary employees are in positions and then they go towards permanent positions. Those hours would just carry over. And if a temporary position ends or they leave employment, we don't have to cash out that hours. It's only if we take it from the rollover. So our thinking on that was it gives the employee hours that they can accrue and use for sick time. 40 hours of sick time really isn't a whole lot of time, especially when you're a full-time employee. We currently give our new employees 3 weeks. We're giving this 40 hours. It stops accruing at 40 hours. So our thought was with 2 weeks or 80 hours, it would be more beneficial to the employee. Plus, like I says, it would also give us a chance to prepare our budgets to do those cash outs.
I will say that you lost me along those lines somewhere, because it sounds like from what you're saying, we're doing this as a benefit for the employee, but not to the financial advantage, the part-time employee, but not to the financial advantage of the county.
Well, we thought the 80 hours would be beneficial to the county
How?
because we're not cashing out the hours each year, and this gives us 2 years to prepare for that cash out, and we would only cash out those hours above the 80 hours. We're not cashing out down to the 40. We would, because if you cash out at 40 or 80, you're still going to accrue those hours for the following year, and we're obligated to make sure that they have 40 hours at the beginning of the year.
Okay, so why don't we just limit it to 40 hours? Wouldn't we have a similar benefit there?
You would, but you'd be paying it out immediately instead of in a year, year and a half. But yes, sir, it's the same type of scenario.
I'm still a bit lost on all this, but
What exactly does the law say? What legally do we have to do?
We have to give them 40 hours of paid or earned paid sick leave per year. And it's based on 1 hour for every 30 hours of work up to a maximum of 40 hours. And so they will stop accruing once they hit that 40 hours. And then when the calendar year rolls around, they'll start accruing again, whether they have the 40 hours in their bank or not.
Okay, so if you're assuming that everyone's going to have this 40 hours. I mean, they'll take some of it. A lot of people take their time, right?
I won't say everybody will, but there will be a portion that will take the sick time.
Right, so
yes.
you can't assume it will be 40 hours every year.
Correct.
Right. So, it's, again, a gamble, but I think the 40 hours every year,
Right.
will even out over the 100 people.
And the 40 hours is only if they go over the 40 hours. So if they had 40 hours on the books, they use it, then the following year, we may only cash out 20 hours if they accrued 40 hours more, and then they still had 20 from the previous year. So
I have another question, Mr.
it's a
Chairman.
gamble whichever way we go.
Right, right.
I think
Chairman.
Supervisor Johnson has a question.
Yeah, reading, it's number 4, or item number 4 in the law that was passed. It says earned paid sick time shall be carried over to the following year, subject to limitations on usage in subsections A and B. Alternatively, in lieu of carryover or unused earned paid sick time from 1 year to the next, an employer may pay an employee for unused earned paid sick time at the end of the year. That's where the may's coming in, and I guess maybe the county would have to look at our part-time employees, because it's always a good step, I believe in that, to get somebody in part-time and they like working for us, they're a good employee, and we make them full-time when we can. I just don't see the point of carrying over more hours than we should be.
Thank you, Supervisor
Chairman
Johnson.
Watson, if I could also chime in.
Certainly, Mr. Esplin.
I think what Supervisor Johnson has quoted is exactly correct. The county can, any employer can carry over 40 hours if that's what they want to do. Alternatively, as Supervisor Johnson pointed out, alternatively, they could choose to pay some out. So it doesn't have to be 80. We could go down as low as 40. It cannot be lower than 40, but the minimum threshold needs to be 40. What Ken was trying to explain is that some of the rationales why you may want to consider going to 80. That's for the board to decide. But from a legal standpoint, 40 is that threshold, and you can just choose to carry over that 40. Alternatively, in lieu of the carryover, you can choose to pay some out, and that's how you wish, if that's what you wish to do.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to act precipitously, but I'm inclined to vote against this right now. But I suggest that maybe we table it to the next meeting so I can get with Mr. Cunningham and maybe others can to nail down this process, because I don't see in how in our tough budgetary times, giving more paid sick time is necessarily a good thing for us. And I had to figure that out because I don't see the logic of what you're saying right now, Ken. I'm sorry.
Okay.
And I agree.
Chairman, if I could add one other item to this. The law will go into effect on July 1st, so we will have another board meeting in order to vote upon this. The remaining provisions of this really should be enacted by July 1st. I mean, it's very important that this get enacted. This will be the law of Arizona, and we need to ensure that our employees have the sick time as required by law. The issues that you're discussing here can easily be resolved and discussed over the next 2 weeks, and we can do that still in time for July 1st. So it can still be done. But we just want to make sure that over these next 2 weeks that we take care of it so that at the next board meeting it can be voted on.
Well, thank you, Mr. Esplanade. I think it behooves us to take a look at it for the next 2 weeks
Sure.
for everyone to feel more comfortable.
And also, I'll make a motion that we table 31 to the next regularly scheduled board meeting.
We have a motion and a second to table the item till the next board meeting. Any further
I think we have
discussion?
to continue it, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, Supervisor Johnson?
I believe we have to continue it. Not table. We have to continue, just for the record.
I will modify my motion to use the word continued in lieu of tabled.
Very good. Modified second, thank you. There being no further discussion, those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, motion carried unanimously. On to item number 37, Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did notice in the backup anything from the sheriff on this item. In state statute, I think it says that they have to have a sign-off on this.
Who do you wish to ask your question to, Supervisor Johnson?
Third row from the back, second person on the end. No, I have no idea.
What's the pleasure?
It'll be Cindy Cox, our treasurer.
I would believe.
Yeah.
Ms. Cox? I don't believe Supervisor Johnson could count the rows correctly.
Okay. Well, I didn't understand the question.
Would you please state your question again to Treasurer Cox?
I didn't see how it wasn't so much for the treasurer, but the statute says that the sheriff's department, I think it's an affidavit, they have to file that when we're doing something like this, and I didn't see it.
Sheriff Schuster, will you file that?
Morning, Sheriff Schuster.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. If we're missing a form, we will ensure that it gets filed. I was unaware that it was missing the affidavit.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Supervisor Johnson?
That'd be perfect, yeah, it's just a form, it has to be filed, just want to make sure that we got it in there for the record.
Okay.
Very good.
So do we need to continue this then?
Or can we approve it subject to the sheriff submitting the required paperwork?
I would imagine we could approve it subject to the requirement.
In that case, I move that we approve item 37, subject to the Mojave County Sheriff's Office submitting any required paperwork to fully affect the clearance to abate taxes.
I'll second
We
that.
have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carried. On to item number 39, and I'm glad we have the treasurer.
I figured I'd stay.
Thank you. Supervisor Johnson, we have the treasurer at the podium.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My only question is I have no problem with the reclassifications. Maybe it would help me if County Manager or County Administrator Hendricks could explain to me the definition of hot jobs.
Mr. Hendricks?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Johnson, when I came to the board and I asked the board to approve the hot jobs designation, a hot job is an area within a department or an elected official's workplace where we have positions because of either vacancies or the inability to attract and retain qualified employees, to where we have the inability to provide adequate services to our residents. And Treasurer Cox came to me with a proposal where she believes that certain things need to occur in her department to where she can adequately provide the services to her residents. And so one of the templates that I agreed to, that I presented to the board, was that if I have an elected official that believes that there's something that they need to do within their department, they can do that within their budget, and it's sustainable for a couple of years, that I'd certainly support that to the board. So Treasurer Cox came to me with a proposal. I took a look at it. It appeared reasonable, and it's I believed that it was something that she needed to provide adequate service to her constituents. I called in my finance director, Coral Lloyd, to look at it to make sure that Coral was convinced that it was sustainable and that it could be done within her existing budget. I called in HR to look at what she was proposing to make sure that it was in accordance with county policies and that it was not against any of our merit rules, and to help out with any of the changes that were being requested, and they've done so, and that's all included in your packet. So that's the reason I'm supporting this particular item to the board, and I would do it with, for any other elected official that came forward with a similar proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Hendricks. Supervisor Johnson, does that give you a satisfactory explanation of the temperature of those employment?
It gives me a long explanation, that's for sure. It looks to me like we're giving basically everybody in the department a pay raise. Is that true?
It appears that it's 4. Is that correct? Ms. Cox? Or Supervisor Johnson had
He said it appears that everyone's getting a raise.
yes.
No,
That's-
they're getting adjustments.
That was his statement, but I'm reading, I think it's only 4.
It varies.
There's about, I want to say 15.
Okay, and I guess that's where, the reclassifications, I have no problem with those.
Okay, so there's,
But I think the other part, is they put in the backup, it's sustainable for 2 years and then it's going to run into more money. I just think without addressing all of the county issues, to address just one department, I think is not a good thing to do at this time. That was my comments. That's all I had.
Thank you, Supervisor Johnson. I think you answered his question.
okay, thank you. And could I just say thank you so much, Supervisor Hendricks and Director Lloyd and Director Cunningham. They were extremely helpful in putting this together for me and helping me achieve the goals that I'd like to for our office.
Thank you, Ms. Cox.
Thank you.
Watson, I have a comment.
Supervisor Bishop?
I just wanted to say that I'll be voting yes for this, especially since it's budget neutral, but I think this is something that the board should kind of keep an eye on for the next couple of years and make sure it stays budget neutral. That's all.
Supervisor Angus?
Yeah, when we gave the divisions, the departments, the ability to go in and readjust, it was part of the line of what we were talking about the way private companies do it, to compensate people based on their worth and not on some arbitrary number that the government sets. And, I think it is. We think we really do have to watch it for the future, but I've been actually very happy and impressed with how the departments have done this. And I know I've heard some other things, because some departments have more money to do these kinds of things than others. So, maybe in the future we can look at some departments that, the jobs cannot be filled and there's extra money and we can help as long as it's budget neutral. But for the most part, I think this has been successful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Angus.
I have nothing.
Very good. Chair would entertain a motion.
I move that we approve item 39 of the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve item number 39 for the agenda. Any further discussion? There being none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried, 4-1.
Thank you so much.
Moving on to item number 41, the approval of an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Kingman for the use of the County Administration Building's auditorium to conduct city council meetings at a cost of $300 per month. Supervisor Johnson, I believe you pulled this item?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't notice anything, I haven't heard any kind of discussion about this going to be goes to infinity, or how long of a contract are we putting in? I have no problem if the City of Kingman has a fire or they're building a new building, and at that point I don't even care if they got it for free, for a short period of time. But do we have any timeline on this? Do they ever plan on building something, or is it in the works to build another building? Or
I think it was a one-year period with four renewals.
That's correct. It's a 1 year. The initial term of the agreement should be for 1 year, commencing July 1st of 2017, and then there's the option to renew for 4 additional 1-year periods, as Supervisor Bishop noted.
okay, we're looking at 5 years, but is there a plan by the city to, remodel or do something, or are we just looking at the county building being the place where they hold all of their meetings?
I believe I can probably answer your question, Supervisor Johnson. They're currently looking at a number of different alternatives for moving some offices and acquiring additional space. But for right now, from time to time, the City of Kingman entertains a large gathering of constituents at some of their meetings, not all, and they wanted to have the ability to have a large meeting where they currently are limited to about 120 people in their current headquarters. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that answers it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My second question would be on the rental fee. I mean, I think we're at bare bones, basically $150 for each meeting. If that's what the staff seem to think they knew, we're going to be getting a lot more wear and tear on our building, and will obviously cause us to have to upgrade the carpets and all that stuff at a sooner time, because we'll be getting more meetings in there. So I don't know if we're covering the cost of the county, but I would feel better if we said we have a $300 minimum each month for whatever, total of 3 hours or whatever that figures out to, because it's going to be easy. Our employees now, they get off at 5, so they're there, so they don't really have to come back in or anything to help out, and the security guards. But we all know that, people don't leave the auditorium right afterwards, so I think it could get into some long meetings. I think that's the only thing, if we could maybe put something in to say, any meeting that goes over this allotted time, you're paying these fees. That was my only question. Thank you.
Sure. Is that a recommendation for the motion?
Well, see what the other board members want.
I have a comment.
Supervisor Bishop.
I think the relationship that we have been building over the years with the different cities, not only Kingman, but Bullhead City, like Havasu and Colorado City, it's important to the county to have that good relationship. And I think this just furthers a good relationship that we have right now working with the city of Kingman on various county issues. So I'm in support of this, and I think it's a budget neutral issue, and I'm glad that we were able to help the city out until they figure out whether or not they're going to build or refurbish another building. So I'll be voting yes on this, and if nobody has any other comments, I'll put that in the form of a
Well,
motion.
I have a comment. So how exactly was this 150, what does that include? Does that include staff?
It
or-
includes the IT person and a security guard and utilities, estimated utilities for the room. Am I correct there?
And, Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Angus, when we started trying to determine the actual cost of them utilizing this building, we went back to the original motion, what the board had approved. And there was some language, and I apologize if I don't have it exactly, but it talked about direct costs. So, when we look at, you could get into some of the minutia if you're trying to determine the exact cost as amortization or a depreciation, and all that stuff. Well, the motion didn't say that. It said direct costs. So we looked at what operations we would have to change to accommodate the cities utilizing this building. And those operations were providing security and then providing IT service. So when we looked at what we would charge, that's what we looked at was the manpower requirements. When we discussed we tried to make also the agreement as simple as possible instead of getting into trying to time the length of the building or the length of the meetings and charging them an hourly rate. We thought it was more prudent to charge them a per meeting rate and to try to take an average of the length of those meetings. And the city proposed that was about, I believe, between 2 and 3 hour long meetings. So that's what we took into consideration when we came up with that figure.
I have two
Thank you,
questions.
Mr. Hendricks. Supervisor Moss.
We took the average meeting, but what Supervisor Johnson was referencing is what if at the end of the year we find out the average is actually 4 hours or 5 hours? That means we're holding the costs. We have to absorb those costs under the current language of the agreement. Am I wrong about that?
Supervisor, Chairman Watson, Supervisor Moss, no, actually, you're correct. And if the time goes under that, the city would be paying in addition to what it actually costs. So we tried to do what was fair. We could do whatever the board decides. And the actual payment is in the scheme of things nominal at best. So we just tried to cover our costs what we thought they would be.
My second question is, we say we're providing one security guard. What happens in the event that they have a turbulent issue on the agenda, as we have had from time to time, and they require additional security? Does the agreement specify who's to provide that additional security?
I don't believe it does. I don't recall reading that in there, but I would assume that if the city needed any addition to what we're currently providing, that they would be responsible for that, regardless of what it is.
Because I would support this, because it looks like we can terminate it for any reason we want after a period of time, after a 6-month review of the hours that they're actually spending of it. So you come back and tell us this is working out just fine. So I'm happy with that. But also that there has to be language in the agreement that says if there's additional security costs, that's on the city, not the county. They can't call us up and say we need an extra 3 or 4 security guards because Mr. Jones has lost his mind and he's showing up. That has to be on them.
Supervisor Moss, I can enlighten you a little bit. I do go to the city council meetings quite frequently, and the chief of police, the Kingman chief of police, is on the board. He attends every meeting. So he's there, he's in uniform, and he is armed. And in one of the most recent meetings where they thought there might be a problem, the chief of police did have 2 of his uniformed officers that were in attendance.
And that's very reassuring, but the written agreement should put that cost and obligation on the city, not the county, because if something bad happens, I don't want them to say, well, look, the agreement says that you're responsible for security costs and you only committed to 1. So I want that, I think it should say they're responsible for any additional security needs. If their chief of police is sufficient, I'm fine with that in their judgment. But it's any additional security costs are on them, not on us.
Okay, I could put this in the form of a motion to approve the intergovernment agreement with the City of Kingman for the use of the county administration building auditorium to conduct city council meetings at a cost of $300 a month, and the city will provide any additional security as needed.
I'd second that.
We have a motion and
For
a second.
discussion?
Supervisor Johnson.
I think that would probably cover it too, but we still have our employees that's there for that runs the boardroom itself, all of the stuff that goes on in there. I'm just worried about them getting carried over into like Supervisor Moss said, sometimes you get meetings that go 4 hours or 5 hours, especially at the city. They seem to be a little more active there, and that something should be there, because if not, we get caught paying our employee for 4 hours and we're only getting paid for 3 hours. But that's fine with me.
And, yeah, I think I took that into account when I suggested to Mr. Hendricks that he come back to us in a few months with an analysis as to how it's working out, just as a report, because we can change it by canceling the agreement if we want to.
Right.
If it gets out of hand.
Sounds good.
Very good. Any further discussion? There being none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And those opposed? Motion carried unanimously. On to the public hearings. Item number 46, I'll open the public hearing for the discussion, possible action to approve the request for a license agreement for Mobilite LLC for the permission to use a certain public road right-of-ways or public roadway easements throughout the unincorporated area of Mojave County for the placement of utility poles up to 120 feet maximum height for the purposes of hoisting, operating, and maintaining telecommunications network equipment, and authorize the chairman to sign on behalf of the Board of Supervisors. Mr. Lutowski?
Good morning,
Good
Chairman
morning.
Watson and members of the board. This item is to present for the board's consideration and possible approval a license agreement for a mobile ID, which is a company introducing a new telecommunications type initiative whereby the company itself erects small cell wireless equipment that it in turn rents to major wireless providers such as Verizon, T-Mobile, etc. And as a result of Mobile ID approaching Mojave County with 2 locations right now, whereby it desires to erect utility poles that are necessary to house these small apparatuses, the 2 locations being in the Kingman Airport area as well as off of Shinneramp Road in the Golden Valley area. Mobile ID desires to move forward with this a license agreement. This type of technology will enable the rollout of 5G cell coverage, as well as expand what may have been previously absent or weak coverage areas relative to cellular communications, as well as, I understand, Wi-Fi. Staff presented Mobile ID with a relatively standard license type agreement, which we have approved through the county attorney's office as well as the risk manager's office. And the only catch would be, and it's not really a catch, poor word, but there is a fee that is set forward with regard to Mojave County receiving 5% of gross annual revenues. However, the Arizona State Legislature passed HB 2365 this past session, which sets forth a modified fee structure for these very types of license agreements, and both the county and Mobile ID through this license agreement have agreed to discuss a modified fee structure after 1 year of the license agreement being in effect, just for the purpose of ensuring that the county is compliant with state statute.
Thank you, Mr. Lutowski. I guess I have a question. The first being, if we were to authorize this license agreement, would each application for a pole position come in front of the commission?
Chairman Watson, no. The license agreement would encompass all of the activities by which Mojave County would manage the facilities, any new facilities being proposed, as well as the 2 that are included.
that's my fear in this proposal. What if they're proposing a 120-foot utility pole in a relatively dense area of Mojave County?
Chairman Watson, that may be an allowance under this license. The current Mojave County zoning ordinance does not have applicability per se to structures within the rights-of-way. Only the license agreement and its height, maximum height specification of the 120 feet that would govern. So, yes, you do have a point with regard to those facilities that do meet that 120-foot threshold would be able to be permitted through this license.
My concern would be is we were just 2 meetings ago, we had a number of people that were concerned about a very similar action. So if there's a mechanism of which we can do the licensing agreement, but then have at least the public the ability to come in and protest if they so desire, I think is only the right thing to do. Any further questions?
I kind of agree with you that we don't want them to have carte blanche to put it wherever they want. There should be some sort of review and approval process. So I don't mind them expanding their network, but I don't want them planting it in someone's front driveway and saying, you got to move your driveway because we're in the right-of-way. Right, so.
Especially a densely populated area that has some
Yes.
scenic views.
So can we continue this item and request that staff address those concerns?
Certainly.
Because if that would be helpful, I'd move that we continue this item and instruct staff to address the comments of the board.
Well, I'd have to close the public hearing in
Okay, I'm
order
sorry.
to do the motion. But anyone else wishing to speak to item number 46 in the audience currently? Yes, ma'am. Please come down to the podium. Good morning. If you'll state your name and address for the record.
Good morning. My name's Holly Johnson. I'm with Mobility. Did you say address?
That'd be fine.
I thought that's what you...
I did.
I live in Henderson, Nevada, and I work out of my home for Mobility.
If you'll give us your address.
2047 Foxfire Court, Henderson, Nevada.
Thank you very much.
Mobility is seeking this agreement with the county so that we can address gaps in coverage and provide the county the infrastructure necessary to meet 5G demands when they come online in 4 to 6 years. So we typically, our facilities range in height from 30 feet to 120, and 30 feet is much more common. 120 feet, they're rare. As Steve said, there are 2 proposed right now for the county. We tend to locate those in industrial areas, and we try to stay away from residential areas for those poles. We don't locate those in residential areas because of the problem that would happen. But the 30-foot poles and 30 or 40-foot poles, those are more in the residential areas.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
I have one question, if I could. We just want to make sure we're on the same page, as Steve Latowski has pointed out. The fees, the fees would be, there's a 1-year provision where there'd be a certain fee, and then after 1 year, the 2 parties would discuss the enactment of the new law. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's your understanding
Yes.
as well? And I think the license spells out that you guys would give us a notice and saying, hey, 1 year has gone, and we need to readdress this. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes.
Okay, because I was looking over that language this morning, and I wanted to make sure that we were on the same page, that that's what you guys were requesting. 1 year, it'd be a percentage, I believe, a flat fee percentage, and then after that, it would be readdressed.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, it
great,
would.
thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir, I believe you'd like to speak to the item? Yes, I would. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
James Barber, 1800 Vista Drive, Mojave Valley, Arizona. Okay, I just listened to this here, and the one part that is missing is the fee structure after the first year. Because when 5G comes online, I can see the company she represents making money, and I can see Verizon making money, but we in the county have given up our land and allowed them to build this tower, and currently at 5%, that's fine. 4, maybe 4.5%, 3.5% is fine, but if it's lower than that, we're giving basically profit. Whatever they're not giving to us is going to private entities. And we need to make sure that, based on the state fee structure, that we maximize the amount of money that we make when we give up this land. And I did not hear any numbers on the second year after, starting with the second year. There's no percentage, and it wasn't mentioned. And I think it should be mentioned in front of the public. Thank you.
And thank you.
I can address that
Presley?
if you like. So the legislature in March of this year passed a new law that specifies exactly how much the fees that the charge would have to, that the county can charge these companies. And so it's largely dictated by the terms of that statute. I've reviewed the statute, not in complete finite detail, but I reviewed it enough to know there's a lot of different schedules and a lot of different rates, and based on this, based on this, based on this, and it goes down as to what it is. Mr. Latowski and I discussed this very same issue. We would like to have a flat fee like this gentleman proposed, but when the legislature has passed this, it makes it challenging, it makes it difficult. That was our preference, I think, originally, was we have a flat fee, and it makes it a lot easier, but with this new law, it changes things. It's a game changer. It was something that was pushed through the legislature, I imagine through the companies that wanted those and have those. There's some wiggle room about existing licenses can remain in effect subject to termination clauses, but the problem is we don't have an existing license. Right now, they're coming before the board. So it puts the county in a difficult situation to try to do that.
Mr.
Thank you, Espen.
Chairman, if I can, I think there's language in the agreement, it's on page 9, paragraph B, that says after the first year, it's 5%. So it's continues to be 5% unless a particular statute changes the formula, and then they have to get back and negotiate that formula. We don't know what this, I don't know exactly what percentage it would be based upon the formula. That's what we got to figure out over the course of this year. But there is language saying it's 5%, except for the potential impacts of this formula.
But that's what we were just talking about, and that's what I was asking this person here, the representative from Mobility, is that they would give us notice after that 1 year. So we anticipate that they would do that after 1 year. They would give us the notice saying, hey, we need to amend this to be consistent with this law that was passed.
And to make sure that I'm very clear, it's 5% the first year, it's 5% for subsequent years, unless Mobility comes to us with written notice and says, we think this law means it's another percentage. And that's out of our hands, whatever the state legislature may have done to us when it comes to changing that percentage, which I suspect would be lower.
You're correct. It is lower. I don't think it's a percentage base. I think it's specifies various different services that are provided. This is how much it'll be, and they cannot charge more than this, and all these other. The county would set up a rate schedule and other things. It's a very long statute that goes into a lot of details.
But my major concern then is the placement. I know the resolution says that they have agreed that they will interfere with traffic and public and residential access as little as possible. But what happens if we have a dispute between a particular location? Who wins that controversy? Is it Mobility, or is it the county? If they, for example, let's say Steve Moss, they decide to come to my house and place a utility pole in front of my driveway, and can the county stop that? Is what it comes down to. And I didn't see where it's clearly specified within the resolution that the county could say, no, we can issue the permit, but it doesn't say we retain the right to reject a proposed location. So that's my one concern over this. It's not the reimbursement rate, because it's 5% or what the law forces us to accept, but where's the county's right to say we're not going to allow this because of the detrimental impact upon the neighborhood or traffic, et cetera.
Exactly my concern.
Right.
Thank you.
So,
Would it be helpful, Chairman Watson, if the motion was specified anything over 40 foot would have to come back to the board for consideration.
Well, even a 30-foot pole in my driveway would cause significant problems.
Inconvenient. Yeah.
Well, how tall is a telephone pole? Aren't
They said it was ranges from, I think they said 30 to 120, if I remember correctly.
Generally, 30 is the regular height for telephone.
Do we have an advanced plan as to where these, so we'll know in advance where these things are going?
I didn't see the advanced plan.
Chairman Watson, Supervisor Angus, only 2 locations have been set forth currently in the license agreement. We have no knowledge of the any additional rollout at this point.
Before we go any further, anyone else wishing to speak to item number 46 before we close the public hearing? Yes, sir. Please state your name and address for the record.
Wayne Holland, 4825 North Mormon Flat Road, Golden Valley. My only thing, just reading the brief part I have here of the permission to use certain public road right-of-ways and public roadway easements throughout the unincorporated areas of Mojave County. Now, I've been trying to figure out where those are that the county has right-of-ways for the roads, because apparently some roads don't even have, we don't have the right-of-way for the road, but there's a road there. So my question would be, where's these specific areas that they can specifically put in those poles? That's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Letowski, you may want to answer that last question. I think it's fairly easy to answer.
Yes, I certainly can, Chairman Watson, members of the board. It is incumbent upon the licensee, Mobile ID in this case, to verify that the county, in fact, has a fee title to the rights of ways by which Mobile ID would desire to situate their equipment. And of course, Mojave County Public Works, our county surveyor, would also verify that.
Thank you. Well, at this time, I'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Supervisor Johnson.
I guess this would be for our county attorney. Is it possible that we could, like when cell towers go in, now they're always on private land, we have a permit process they go through, and maybe would it be possible to put in there that we need to go through a permitting process on these poles, not that we're going to turn them down, but at least so the public has notice ahead of time that we're putting in, or not we, but we're allowing the putting in of 30-foot telephone poles and 120-foot telephone poles with the address, because if it just gives it a blank thing to go ahead and do, and like Supervisor Moss said, and one just shows up in his front yard and he never had any notice of it or anything, I think it's going to cause us problems.
Mr. Letowski.
Chairman Watson, Supervisor Johnson, the license agreement is set up very much like our other franchise and license agreements, whereby through the Public Works Department, a right-of-way use permit is applied for and administered as part of erecting or even maintaining such infrastructure. However, where it gets somewhat convoluted is Public Works typically is not positioned to render approvals of infrastructure as it relates to, property, possible, zoning related type issues and public perspectives and that. We look at it purely from an engineering standpoint in the context of, will this structure placed at this location have undue impact on the maintenance and protection of traffic on the roadway? And that may not be aligned per se with the public's perception of the overall infrastructure just being in place, even if it was not deemed a hazard to traffic. This license agreement just sets forth a cap at 120 feet, but it is, at the board's suggestion, palatable to consider that language be added to bring back any proposals between a certain range or possibly any infrastructure that may be added.
Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor
If
Moss.
we don't want to get into the business of approving the location of the poles in advance, but a member of the citizenry comes to us and says, this pole that just got put in is causing these community hardships, whatever they may be, could we retain the right to require mobility to remove the pole and place it at another location after the fact.
Chairman Watson, Supervisor Moss, just reviewing the agreement, I do know for sure that the any contemplation of public improvements, such as roadway improvements, would make it incumbent upon the licensee at the county's request to relocate their facilities. This license may be somewhat weak with regard to just more of a discretionary type request driven by public comment.
Because, again, my concern is, I think Mobility is probably an excellent company. I think the Public Works Department does a really good job, but where's our recourse if something bad happened in our private, from our perspective, in our private right-of-ways that we've just granted them a license to use? How do we correct that bad?
Right.
I mean, it can be a pole in someone's driveway, it could be any number of things, I just don't know. I don't want to try to anticipate advance, but there's got to be some corrective mechanism there in case there's a public harm that we need to address somehow.
Yes, and I would suggest that we take this back for staff to readdress on a number of issues. Number one, the height of the pole might be acceptable for 30-foot poles in residential, but when you get in excess of 40 feet, then they may need to be addressed by a public hearing, something to that effect. I just don't want to take the rights of our citizens away and then not be able to be addressed.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we continue this item until such time as Public Works can address these issues with Mobility, specifically focusing on residential areas and the county's and Mobility's ability to redress issues of public harm if they tend to arise.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Questions? There being none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed? Motion carried unanimously. On to item number 47. Under the regular agenda, discussion, possible action regarding the direction of staff to develop a proposal for the code enforcement program to be brought to the board for consideration. The proposed program will proactively address trash and other environmental nuisances, as well as zoning, building violations in accordance with state statutes and adopted codes, ordinances, and agreements, and propose a funding mechanism for the proposal.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hendricks.
we may want to get Tim Walsh, our Development Services Director, down here, but let me take a stab at this first.
Certainly.
After the budget workshop, there were several things that were identified as priorities by the Board of Supervisors. Most of them would necessarily need to be done through the budget process and through impacting the general fund or being funded through the general fund. And what we did was, from a staff perspective, is we tried to identify if there were one or more areas that we could actually look at and bring before the board that wouldn't have a tremendous adverse impact on the general fund or could be done outside or funded outside of the general fund. And what staff identified were two items that were of interest to the board. One was code enforcement, and the other one was a transportation excise tax. And we believed it was important to try to package enough information together to bring before the board at least before or during the time that the preliminary budget was going to be approved, which is today, if we do get it approved today, and to present that so that staff can get some direction on if the board wanted to proceed with these particular items and how to proceed. And what we're addressing with this item is the code enforcement, and what we'll address at a later date today is the half-cent transportation excise tax. What we believed, we met with all administrative stakeholders regarding the code enforcement, which included our development services, it included health department, it included our attorney's office, and other things to see if there was a sufficient nexus to utilize the statutes regarding setting fees for solid waste disposal to be utilized for code enforcement and for cleaning up areas or for enforcing the cleanup of certain areas. And if that was so, we looked at what particular account within our solid waste disposal fees could possibly be best utilized. And what we have determined is that you all know that we have $10 million in the bank for post-closure and post-closure care of our landfill facilities. I asked Development Services to take a look at whether those fees can be reduced, and if so, how much, and how much may be available if those fees were reduced and we enacted an additional fee for code enforcement. And the dollar amount that we came up with maximum was about $300,000. What we also looked at is to try to come up with an idea that we could actually have some confidence in and presenting to the board on a program that would have the best chance of not failing, that would have the best chance of succeeding. And we believe that that program would be a standalone division within possibly the Development Services Department. So we start piecing these pieces together, and we have confidence enough to come before the board at this time to ask that you consider this code enforcement issue to be funded through some sort of fees outside of the general fund, and for us to be able to bring back a proposal in front of the board, a complete proposal, for your consideration to make a decision on whether you want to move forward or not.
Thank you, Mr. Hendricks.
Chairman Watson?
Supervisor Rankin.
So you're taking, you want to take this out of environmental services and put it in development services?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Angus, what right now code enforcement is being handled by Development Services, and when we were having this brainstorm sessions that we had, there was a little scope creep, and we started talking about what would be necessary. But basically, all we're asking Development Services to do is to proactively go after violations, not to take anything really away from environmental services, even though environmental services does a small portion of the work that the zoning people do in Development Services. As you all know, environmental services is partially funded through landfill fees for 2 employees that actually do the dangerous building abatement side, plus some other duties. And we would be looking at trying to combine all of the dangerous building and code enforcement fees, augment that with an offset in our post-closure fees, and possibly hire, I think we would be looking at a nominal amount of new employees and getting some legal assistance also to go after some of these areas. We'd also be looking at, from our brainstorming session, we would also be looking at revamping our code enforcement regulations to provide for additional teeth, and then prioritizing areas, let's say probably going after those areas within, and this is just the initial idea, within a quarter of a mile of the incorporated boundaries of the cities, and start looking at making those areas comply. There was also some good brainstorming that was done by Tim Walsh himself. He came up with the idea that these enforcement issues would first be started through a community awareness announcement and community cleanups, so that people that would have an opportunity to actually clean up their areas be able to fund taking their cleanups to and pay for the disposal of their cleanups within our landfill, and then be required to comply with our code enforcement regulations. And at least we would be assisting areas of the communities in cleaning up. And we believe this program would benefit property values, it would benefit communities, it would encourage incorporations, and it would be a benefit to Mojave County, and that's why we're proposing it.
I do get a lot of calls about this, and I know we talk about it and since I've been supervisor, and I've always been sort of told that the reason is that we don't have enough employees. So is this going to, how is this going to change that? If it sounds like a great program, but if we don't have enough employees, how are we going to enforce it?
And Chairman Watson, Supervisor Angus, we would be increasing the budget for code enforcement for our zoning by at least $300,000, probably more, but an identified $300,000 from closure, post-closure fees. That would allow us to hire at least 4 more employees and possibly a half-time or full-time attorney, we believe. But that's all something that we're going to put together and have a definitive program to place in front of you all so you can decide on the funding and whether or not you want to go forward with it.
Okay, I misunderstood you because I thought I heard you say that with nominal employees.
Well,
Oh, okay, but
probably
that
4.
means more.
Yes.
Okay, I thought that meant putting more together, but, okay. Well, that's good then.
Chairman Watson?
Thank you. Supervisor Bishop?
I'm very excited about this proposed new program for code enforcement, and it's about time that Mojave County became reactive instead of proactive. And I think with this new program, with the additional revenues to fund the program and a few more employees, plus departments not doing the same work twice, combining these departments into one department, I think is going to be very effective. And we've tried to be proactive. It hasn't worked. I see the Cactus Cleaners, many of their members are here today, and I'm sure that they are very supportive of this program, although I think we're going to see the best results in the areas that are closer to the cities. But it's also going to help the Golden Valley areas with their problems with illegal dumping in the desert and some of our remote communities as well. And I just see this as an exciting turn in Mojave County history to where we're going to give people the opportunity to clean up those properties, and some people will not do that, and we're going to finally have the teeth to make them do that. So I'll be voting yes for this, and I hope I can get the board's support as well.
Thank you, Supervisor Bishop. I have one person signed up that would like to speak to it, Mr. Hollins, Wayne Hollins.
Good morning, Supervisors and Chairman Watson. I'm in favor of the proposal there, and a couple things important, mainly of enforcement. That's the one thing that we've been lacking on. And again, I started the Cactus Cleaner a little over 2 years ago, so we've cleaned up a lot of trash out of Golden Valley, because that's where we're from, so that's where we mainly work at. The problem I've seen in the past, we're a volunteer group and we've did a lot of work out there. I've seen 0 county people policing up the trash that accumulated well before I ever got into the county. So I think it's time for the county to have people feet on the ground helping to get the trash out, keep the trash out, and we can supplement as a group of volunteers what the county is attempting to do. I don't think we should be the main force in cleaning up the county, and specifically Golden Valley, but it's time for the county to step up. And also that has to do with the landfill. 2 short hours, not enough days, too far away for some. Recycling, you have recycling in the cities, nothing in the county. So if I'm going to the landfill and recycle, I got to come out, go up to the landfill, drive all the way down to Kingman to recycle anything I want to recycle, instead of being able to go out in my community and recycle in the community. And the people in Chloride and Dolan Springs even got a farther drive if they want to hit the landfill and recycling. So more people going to the landfill because of the longer hours would increase the revenue going to the landfill, should pay for, or at least partially pay for any additional cost. And the landfill would be a perfect place to have a recycling area before you cross the scales, so you could recycle and not have to drive another 15 miles after you drove 10 or 15 miles to get to the landfill in the first place. We can consolidate that operation and do some recycling and landfill all in one shot. And the city's considered it important to have a recycling program. I don't know why the county hasn't been as supportive, but I do appreciate everybody's work towards the problem and that we're finally getting some traction here. And the cactus cleaners, specifically myself, I'll be glad to help any way we can to help and continue to clean up Golden Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Hollins. I neglected to make sure that you stated your name and address for the record.
Wayne Hollins, 4825 North Mormon Flat Road, Golden Valley.
And thank you. I believe we had another person that wanted to speak to the issue. Yes, sir. I'll give you a brief, you're not signed up, but I'll give you a brief moment.
James Barber, Mojave Valley, Arizona, 1800 Vista Drive. Okay, when I was in the Army, I was in charge, I was second in command of a jail. And what we did was we took all our people who were under punishment, we took them out to clean up. Now, I don't know what kind of services the county gives out to the indigent, but if they're not working for their money, we're just giving our money away. And there should be, under this program, there should be some way that our indigent have to earn their money. Because my wife works as a grocery check cashier, and the total payments, when she comes back and tells me about the numbers, a person who is not working earns equivalent to about $40,000 a year in some locales. And if we're giving away our money and we don't have them working for it, we should. And that plan should include some way so the indigent can earn the benefits that we're giving them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Any further questions or for staff?
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Johnson.
And I don't expect them to have the answer today, but it'd be for the county attorney's office. I mean, we're starting to go down a slippery slope on using landfill closure fee money for things that I think don't really fall into the category that's supposed to be, that money is taken on. I think we're getting a little far afield by saying, oh, well, we'll lower the landfill fee and then we'll use more money to fill this other program. And at some point, it's like HERF funds. They got pretty stringent regulations on how that money can be used.
So you would like to have clarification from Mr. Esplin?
Yeah, I don't expect it today, but I think we really need to look at that before we get into something where we can come back and be called on the carpet for using the money the wrong way.
Chairman Watson, I can address that real briefly. If Supervisor Johnson, looking at the backup, I'd just direct you to page 3. Those are the statutes that we were looking at that would authorize the county to run this program with those fees. And I'd be happy to sit down and talk with you as well about it and answer any questions. But your first start is going to be those statutes. You're looking at ARS 49-742 is where you're going to start. And then it kind of, that page 3 details the step-by-step analysis that we were looking at.
Okay, yes, I saw that, but I still had a lot of questions on it because, sometimes we can have good ideas, but when we implement them, we might not implement them the right way.
Oh, I understand that, and I understand your concerns, and I'd be happy to address them, and I'd be happy to look at them again as well. No problem, I can do that.
Chairman Watson?
That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.
Refresh my memory, wasn't that money used to help build the Development Services building about 6 years ago? You used the landfill, or you took a loan against it, or something like that?
Mr. Chairman, I can answer that question, I believe.
Supervisor Johnson?
When we were building new buildings, we took the fees, HERF fees and landfill fees and flood control fees, and instead of sticking it with the taxpayers and the general fund, the people that are using that space paid for that space, which we thought was an adequate thing, and we had it all checked out. So, but that was inside their parameters. I think now we're getting far afield on, for buying their building, we can argue whether they should have furnish their own building or not. But if we're now taking land closure fees and saying we're using that to go out and do cleanup, I don't think that's where you got that original language for. Does that clarify it, Supervisor Anderson?
I guess.
Thank you, Supervisor Johnson.
I'd like to make a motion if there's no further discussion.
Certainly.
I'd like to direct staff to develop a proposal for a code enforcement program to be brought to the board for consideration. The proposed program would proactively address trash and all other environmental nuisances, as well as zoning and building violations in accordance with state statute and adopted codes and ordinances and agreements, and propose a funding mechanism for that proposal.
Thank you, Supervisor Bishop.
I'm going to second the motion primarily because it's just directing staff to put together a plan. This is a very preliminary stage.
Right. I have a motion and a second, put together a preliminary plan. Any further questions? There being none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed? Motion carried. Item number 48. Discussion, possible action regarding the authorization or additional appropriation of funds in the amount of not to exceed $30,000 from Fund Number 205, Highway User Revenue Fund Contingency, to maintain continued services by the law firm of Gust Rosenfeld, PLC, to represent and defend Mojave County on September 9, 2016. Summons filed with the clerk of the Mojave County Board of Supervisors.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve item 48 of the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for the approval of item 48. Any further discussion or questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Johnson.
Oh, no, I have a different number here. Never mind. I'm okay, thanks.
Okay. There being no further discussion, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Item number 49. Discussion, possible action regarding the adoption of a Board of Supervisors Resolution number 2017-069, ordering a countywide election, special election for the purpose of approving a transportation excise tax for roads at the maximum appropriate 0.5% per dollar rate permitted by the Arizona revised statutes for enactment on January 1, 2018, solely to contract for the repair, maintenance, construction, reconstruction, and improvement of road infrastructure.
Mr. Chair.
Number of people that have signed up to speak to the issue.
Mr. Chairman, may I do a little introduction?
Mr. Hendricks.
Okay, like I mentioned earlier, this item was a result of the budget workshop, to where there was one or more supervisors desiring to see something done with our roads and streets. So we took a look at this item, and actually a half-cent transportation excise tax was approved by the board in 2000, and then later withdrawn. So a lot of the documents that were needed to actually give a flavor for what was being proposed were already prepared. And so I asked our Public Works Director, Steve Letowski, to try to put together a program for the board to take a look at, see what it looks like, either decide to move forward with or give staff additional direction on how they would like us to proceed or not to proceed with this particular item. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hendricks.
Is it our turn? Are you going to have people talk? Or
Go ahead if you'd like to make comments.
I would like to make a comment, since I think I have
Supervisor
something to do with this being in front of us. I looked at the resolution, and I do appreciate the preliminary draft from the county administration and Mr. Letowski and Mr. Hendricks. I have three actual issues with the proposed resolution, which I think we need to work on over the next couple of weeks. And it comes down to this. One, I think we need to engage more with the cities, because that's 60% or more of the voters that would be looking at to approve this. And I think there may be some, it doesn't necessarily mean it changes the percentages which have been initially proposed, but without even the courtesy of a meeting, discussions, et cetera, with the city managers and administration, we don't need to have hard feelings there going forward into an election. So we might want to extend them the courtesy of having some serious discussions and taking on board their input regarding this proposal. The second thing I have is there was 4 conditions or 4 restrictions I wanted to send with this to the voters. One was a sunset provision, and that's in there. The second was that it could be only used for roads, not buildings, couldn't be swept for other projects. The third was that it would be not used to expand the size of government. It would have to go out to private contractors and private businesses. We couldn't use it to supplement pay employee wages or hire new people. And the fourth was that it would be evenly distributed amongst the 5 districts, so each of our 5 districts would have an equal incentive to vote for this, as opposed to, for example, Bullhead City saying, well, I only have one county road, so why the heck would I vote for a county sales tax for roads? You just lost 20% of Mojave voters in one fell swoop. So that was my reasoning. I'm looking at the resolution, and I see the sunset, which is good. I see language in there which I believe could be reasonably interpreted to only deal with private contractors and only for roads. There's a line about this money will be used for contractors for purposes of maintaining roads. But to confirm it takes care of 2 of those conditions, I'd like to see a legal opinion out of the county attorney's office to ensure that it's limited, because we don't need, the county government, in my opinion, and government in general, has had a lot of blowback for decisions made in the past, and I want to avoid future blowback. I'm trying to build up trust and credibility that if they vote for this, they know it's going to go into roads, and they know the government is not going to get bigger. And if if that language can be confirmed as being suitable for that purpose, I'm feeling really good about it. If it needs some tweaks, I think we should address that, because we're going to have a lengthy period of time before an election, and I'd rather deal with it before someone finds a flaw and cuts our legs out from under us than down the road. And finally, the district distribution issue, which I think can be taken care of by the conversations with the cities. So I think this is somewhat premature. It's a good idea. I think we're making progress, but I really think that it should be continued for a period of time so that we can take care of those 2 issues, because it really boils down to 2 issues. Are the conditions within the proposal, and can we engage more with the cities in order to see if we're going to have their active support? Because tax proposals are tough in Mojave County. We can't afford to be making our own opposition because a few hundred votes could send it the other direction.
Exactly. Right. I appreciate your comment, Supervisor Angus.
Okay, just to get it out of the way, I won't be supporting this in any way, shape, or form this year. I think that as we go into this budget process, this is not my top priority. I'll be talking about that in our next agenda item. And a special election costs about $250,000. So with this thing being exactly the way it's written, as Supervisor Moss said, there is absolutely no incentive for cities to vote for it. I think just sort of the nature of it is difficult. Bullhead City tried to do a sales tax just for roads, and with all the money going into the city, it didn't pass. Of all the things we need right now, I know our roads are in terrible condition, and it's only going to get worse, and it's something I think that we need to start talking about for next year. I'll be talking about this in our next agenda item, but last year's budget we were all talking about the sheriff. And that is my top priority, and we'll talk about that. So I just wanted to get out, I will not be voting for this. I just don't think right now, in our budget time, this is a top priority.
Thank you, Supervisor Angus.
Mr. Chairman, if I could?
Certainly.
I agree with Supervisor Angus in that last year, we were just talking about the sheriff, and that's why when we did our our small list of, our short list of budget priorities, I think all of us listed the sheriff's department. But I think we're currently in a time where our immediate pressing needs are not coming at us one at a time in a steady stream. They're beginning to, it's like an avalanche. The boulder's getting faster and faster rolling down the hill, and we're collecting even more issues. Mr. Latosky might be able to add to this, because I think we've asked him as a board to prepare a report, which I'm certain he's in process of doing, a small, short, couple-page report, which can be easily distributed and understood. But my understanding from communications with him is 45% of our roads are approaching failure, and that 55% are going to hit that within 1 to 10 years. And then if we think we have road problems, the cost to fix it is going to be astronomical if we don't deal with it now. So we are going to be penny wise or pound foolish. That's what it's coming down to at the present time. And I don't want to vote for this. I don't. But the two data points, one are the reports coming out of our engineering department, and they're good engineers, and me driving these roads that are in question. It's obvious we have a severe problem that's developing. But I'd like to Mr. Latowski to confirm my statements as being accurate, because I don't want to step on an engineer's toes and put words in his mouth if he doesn't agree with my characterization. I don't have that professional qualification.
Before you get started, Mr. Latowski, I'm going to ask Vice Chair to take over for just a couple minutes.
Don't let the power go to your head.
Okay. Mr. Latosky, proceed.
Supervisor Angus, Supervisor Moss, yes, Public Works, through our very highly regarded capital pavement preservation program, has completed engineering analysis which indicate approximately 45% of the regional highways and arterials countywide. This is about 313 miles of the 800-plus paved miles of roadway. About 45% have reached the end of their service life and are certainly candidates for more rigorous rehabilitation or reconstruction. Staff did provide that the two-pager that was requested by the board in the item backup for this item. I believe it was distributed separately as well. But what it does show is an approximate $8 million annual shortfall when one considers the practice of maintaining and keeping in best practice service our entire roadway network to the best practice.
Okay. Any questions from Mr. Latosky?
I don't have any questions, but I do have comments.
Okay.
The thought that 45% of our regional highways are approaching failure is significant, but in Golden Valley, just our regular dirt roads that are in need of maintenance are a big concern, and upgrading those roads from tertiary maintenance to just standard regular maintenance is a big concern in Golden Valley. And I see this this transportation tax as a win for everybody in the county, but it's really a big win for the unincorporated areas of my district. And I understand Supervisor Angus is, her district is mostly the city of Bullhead, so I don't expect her to sympathize with Golden Valley too much because she's not out there driving those dirt roads. But believe me, I go out there weekly and I'm visiting different places, and some of the roads are atrocious and not even, as Mr. Holland says, not even a county road, but people are using them as a county road. So I think this would be a way to help Mojave County as we go into the 21st century, and people are moving here because they love our county, and we have to be ready for that. In regards to the sheriff's office, I think everyone on the board wants to be able to give the sheriff more money so that he can do his job and drive on these roads that we hope that we're going to be able to improve for emergency services as well. But I see the sheriff only being helped if we can get a quarter-cent sales tax that would generate the funds that we could allocate to the sheriff's office. If we can't get unanimous support from the Board of Supervisors to initiate a new quarter-cent sales tax, 1/4 of a penny, I don't see the sheriff being able to get the money he needs to do his job, because without that tax and unanimous support, we'll be going for property taxes, and that'll be a large increase, and it won't be enough of a large increase to help our sheriff, so.
Okay. Before I leave this chair, I'll say that I hope to address that in the next agenda item. And for the record, I'm very sympathetic to Golden Valley roads. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Chair, can I follow up with Mr. Letowski?
Certainly.
I did have a question, Mr. Letowski, when I was going through the various communications. I thought our roads were funded by roughly $12 million in HERF monies and another $3.5 million in VLT. Is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly?
Supervisor Moss, correct. Between the two funding sources, we are estimating in fiscal year 18 about $15.5 million in total revenue.
Then can you confirm or clarify within the page 11 of our budget book where it says the VLT is 7.7 million, not 3.5 million? Or is there some apportionment to that 7.7 million, which is not entirely for roads, it goes for other purposes?
Supervisor Moss, I greatly regret I don't have that particular page.
Cora Lloyd just said that 3.5 goes to your department and the rest goes to the general fund. Am I correct, Ms. Lloyd? I knew that, but I just want to make sure the public listening to this would understand that. Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Letowski. I have no further questions, and I'll put you over to the chairman.
Okay. Any further comment? Did we get to the?
No, I didn't.
Okay. We have another number of people that would sign up that would like to speak to the item. Before I do, is there a motion to possibly entertain the suggestions of the cities, or?
I would like to do that, but maybe we should listen to the people who wish to speak so we can maybe wrap, if they have concerns, we can wrap those in. Because I don't want to miss something and then have to redo it all over again a couple weeks down the road.
I thought we could
Mr. Chairman?
might have a chance to do both. Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you. I mean, it's obviously up to the people if we pass something. It's up to you if you want to have people speak on it. But it sounds like from the board, it's going to be a continued item to have the cities meet with county staff to get their input on something to be brought before the public. So I don't know if you're just having somebody talk on something that they're going to get together and discuss, after the meeting. So.
Thank you for your input. You and I were thinking on the same level there. I would think it would probably be advantageous for us to do either two directions, either table it for discussion with the cities and those folks that would like to have input, or we can take that time to have somewhat of a public hearing today. I'll leave that up to you, you folks.
Well, since I think one of the things I wanted was see if our county attorney's office could issue a legal opinion. They wouldn't be able to get that done today. Ryan's good, but he's not that good. And so what I would like to do is make a motion to continue item 49 until our next regularly scheduled meeting, to give such time for the county administration to engage with the municipalities to discuss this proposed resolution, take aboard their concerns, consider potential modifications, while at the same time tasking the county attorney's office with authoring a legal opinion, doesn't have to be big, as to whether the proposed resolution meets those 4 conditions and criteria we talked about, limiting the county's ability to expend those funds, or if it does not, proposing additional language to take care of that.
Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor Johnson.
I could support what Supervisor Moss wants to make as a motion. The only thing I would suggest would be that we extend the time to 30 or 60 days with the budgets the cities are going through in the county, and everything else, I think, going just 2 weeks from now is going to be hard to get everybody together.
Okay. I'll amend my time frame of my motion to bring it back to the board at such time as the county administration believes those goals identified have been accomplished.
Okay.
I'll second that if that's the motion.
We have a motion and 2 seconds.
Okay.
Okay. With that in mind, those folks that have signed up for item number 49, if you wish to continue to come down and speak, if you'd like to speak briefly, that'd be great, but we are going to be tabling this for input from the cities and other folks that are interested into this item. So if, Mr. Hollins, would you like to get up to say something briefly?
Very briefly. Wayne Hollins, 4825 North Mormon Flat Road, Golden Valley. I pretty much agree with Supervisor Moss's statements, and I don't particularly like taxes and sales taxes and any other type of taxes that you want to have, but I do understand the need for them. My main concern, again, is that they're spent what they're for, because we've all heard that before, like the TV tax and the other tax that keeps getting swept. Those are specific taxes for specific purposes, but yet they didn't get spent for that. So that I would like assurances that if we're going to do that, that next year or 5 years from now, we're not going to change your mind and use it for something else.
Thank you, Mr. Hollins.
That's pretty much. Thank you.
Thank you. Lewis Ward?
Chairman Watson, while Mr. Ward's approaching the podium, I did have questions on Facebook wanting reassurances that the state of Arizona would not be able to sweep these funds. So, you know, if we could clarify that for the public,
Thank you.
might be helpful.
Mr. Chairman, board members, Lewis Ward, 5602 North Golden Valley. And I stand strongly opposed to this tax. And item number 48 is a good reason why. Diverted HERF funds. Okay, that's a good example. And I have a couple of questions. Didn't the state of Arizona just increase the gas tax by 10 cents?
No, sir.
That did not become implemented?
No, sir.
Okay. And as Mr. Hollins mentioned, I'm just kind of concerned about where these funds would go. If they would go to the roads or they would be appropriated in other areas.
As it's proposed, it's for roads only.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Can I say something?
Certainly.
Just in case we were less than clear, I believe 48 deals with road litigation to make sure we preserve county right-of-ways for those who didn't know that.
Right.
Right. So that they weren't swept. That was just a designated fund.
Toby Cotter.
Mr. Chairman, board members, good morning. Thank you for allowing me just a brief moment. The cities, especially Bullhead
Your
City.
name and address
I'm
for the
sorry,
record.
Toby Cotter. I'm the city manager, Bullhead City, 2355 Train. Your proposed motion is significantly what we've requested. And on behalf of the cities, it's another good example of us working well together, always trying to find that moment where we can do what's best for all of the residents, not only in the cities, but the county. So I appreciate everything you're doing today. And as we work together to find that middle ground, like we did on flood control, like we've done on incarceration rates and all the things that we're working well on, it's just another example. We have a concern. We've given you those concerns, and you're hearing us loud and clear, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Cotter. Mr. Barber. We will be tabling it. That's the proposed motion, so if you could keep your comments brief.
James Barber, Mojave Valley, Arizona, 1800 Vista Drive. Okay, I'm looking at it. Supervisor Moss took care of 3 of the items that I wrote down. How much, how long, and my questions are, if we implement this tax, what will the state, can the state reduce our HERF funds because we're getting funds to fix our roads? Second is, where is the repair priority? When Bullhead City's tax proposal came up, the first question I asked was, where's the proposal, how long, how much? And if there was a sunset provision when they reached the how much. With the economy improving, we will be getting, hopefully we'll be getting more taxes. So we need that repair priority, and we got to avoid redirections of the funds, which is basically have been addressed. So as long as the state doesn't reduce our HERF funds because we're getting more money, I'm down with it, and I would be a supporter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay, we have a motion and a second.
I have one last comment, if I may.
Supervisor Bishop.
I spoke to the City of Kingman mayor, and she also had similar concerns as Bullhead City and Lake Havasu City. But she's very much, it's my understanding, she's in support of this because the City of Kingman is in need of a lot of upgrades for their roads right now, so.
Thank you very much. I notice that every morning when I come to work.
Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you. I think another thing, and the county attorney can correct me if I'm wrong, but people are curious about sweeps and that sort of thing. I believe when it's a county-initiated ordinance that there can't be any sweeps of that money.
That's my understanding also.
Yes.
Is that
I
correct?
don't know the answer to that, but I'd go along with that. I'd have to look into that issue. But I mean, it sounds like you're square with that, but I don't know for certain.
It sounds like we're square with it, Supervisor Johnson, but there's no guarantees on our state legislature.
Can I ask, because I agree with you, Chairman Watson, I don't think they can take our direct raised tax revenue, but maybe we can ask Mr. Esplin to include a paragraph in the opinion he's going to give us on that point, so we can at least have a basis for reassuring the voters as opposed to simply our opinions.
Right.
I can do that, yes.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. For how many days did we?
It was open-ended based upon when the county administrator feels prepared to bring this back to the board.
Okay.
That was based upon Supervisor Johnson's suggested amendment
Okay,
to the
great.
motion.
For total input.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? There being none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carried. I've got a request from some people on the dais for a 5-minute break. So we will break for 5 minutes and be back. It might be more appropriate for a 10-minute break. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could get saddled up again for the remainder of this meeting.
We'll talk about, I mean, I know, and I kind of figured that you'd be probably against our position.
I'm hesitant to use the gavel. I didn't want Supervisor Moss to spill his water.
I really appreciate that because I would have held a grudge.
Okay, we will reconvene at this point. Supervisor Johnson, are you still online?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We're on now to item number 50, discussion, possible action regarding the adoption of the 2017-2018 tentative budget with modifications and set a public hearing set for August 7th, 2017 for the public hearing on the final budget and tax levy and truth in taxation, if applicable, and set a special board meeting for the adoption of the final budget on August 7th, 2017, following the public hearing. With that, we have Ms. Lloyd, Director of Finance. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss the tentative budget this morning. In your packet, we've provided quite a bit of summary information for modifications that were made or recommended since our last meeting on the budget workshop. And we also re-included a list of the initiatives and columns for those that were included, those that were not included. And I believe that they have the tax rate equivalent should any of those be added back in. At the back of that packet, we've prepared the tentative budget using the state forms, which we are required to do. There's essentially, it takes all of the information in your 1,400-page book, consolidates those by department and by fund, and provides you some overall information. Today, I would like to have you review those list of modifications and make sure that we are in agreement with the appropriateness of including those into the tentative budget. The tentative budget does set a ceiling for appropriation, so if this were adopted today, any form of this, once modifications have been made, that will be the maximum that the Mojave County's budget could be for the coming year, and therefore very important to discuss any items that may raise that. You would not be permitted to increase the budget during the year, only reduce or stay even. A couple of items we listed on the very first reconciliation page that were added, that the tentative budget does increase a property tax rate increase of 16 cents to contribute about $2.8 million in order to balance the general fund. There were some expenditure modifications as well. Those consisted of some of the state cost shift changes, some liability insurance adjustment. The others are purchase order rollovers that were, most of the items have been procured this year but may roll over into next year, so we've had to adjust that. Those items all being taken into consideration, the county would end up with a fund balance of about $19.5 million at the end of 2018 if there were no other changes, as well as about $612,000 of restricted balances from the current year's EBT premium holiday. Subsequent to the writing and preparation of the tentative budget, a couple of things I think are important to note. One, the assessor's office is proposing a budget reduction of about $11,000, consisting of a decrease from an office specialist position to an office senior position, and then would include a pay increase for the administrative assistant's position for assuming additional duties. So that would be overall a reduction. I'm not sure if all of you received a copy of that, but that would be a general fund savings to you. And I can provide you with additional information on that, but that would be a change between the tentative and final if that were included. The second item is we received at the end of last week a memo from the PSPRS, and they were offering and want to get the evaluation on all of the jurisdictions' opinion that it's possible on an amendment to Senate Bill 1442 to amortize the unfunded liability from 20 years to 30 years. So initially, we were provided a bit of information to evaluate that. Supervisor Moss has been in direct communication with PSPRS and is our liaison with CSA, and we initially responded that it didn't appear to be a true benefit to Mojave County. It looked like it increased the long-term costs, so we would be meeting today with the board and would be obtaining board's feedback whether you choose to have a maximum amortization period of 20 or 30 years. So with that, I will turn it over to all of you.
If I could, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Ms. Lloyd. Yes, Supervisor Moss.
Since I was referenced just recently, I'll fill in with what my conversations were with Jared Smoot, I think his name is, with PSPRS, also with EGORP. They handle the same plan. My understanding was we were paying for the PSPRS something like $600,000 a year or something along those lines under this current budget over our $19 million debt for that plan alone, or $20 million. I think it might be $20 million, but total between the two, it's $39 million that we owe. Brass tacks is if we just keep making our minimum payments, essentially we're going to pay off that $39 million with county tax dollars of $100 million because of the interest that we would be charged by essentially financing that debt. So if we don't deal with it, if we deal with it over a 30-year period, we're retiring that $39 million debt with $100 million county tax dollars. I don't think that's beneficial because sending $61 million to New York or London bankers is not necessarily my idea of sound money management. So my thought was that we figure out a way to pay more money more rapidly. And I am not rooted in it has to be a sales tax, it has to be a property tax, it has to be this, it has to be that. I just know that we have to pay that off in 6, 7, 8 years if we want to minimize tens and tens of millions of dollars, not going to sheriffs, not going to roads, not going to anything except the privilege of owing money to the state of Arizona's pension plan, which I don't think is a very good privilege to pay for. We could, I'm going to say the nasty words, we could impose a sales tax if the board unanimously agreed. And if every penny went to pension, I'm not saying it would, but hypothetically if it did, we'd have, what, $6.5 million a year? So in 7, 8 years, we could pay it all off as opposed to 30. And if my math with Ms. Lloyd and Ms. Smoot is correct, rather than paying $61 million in interest, we pay between $7 and $9 million of interest. Is that approximately correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Or we can do a property tax increase, same math, to get it done. The question becomes, do we want to prepare a budget knowing that we will, over time, send $61 million outside of Mojave County, Arizona for no tangible benefit, or do we want to prepare a budget that minimizes that wasted money? And for the edification of the voters, we did not incur that debt. It's an Arizona state pension debt. We have no control over it. They estimated they'd have a 7.4% rate of return. And of course, they didn't. It's around 1% or less, especially if you factor in inflation. The end of the day, the state legislature decided to try to fix it. And they did that by increasing employee contributions and things like that. And the Arizona Supreme Court issued some cases that say that's unconstitutional. The employer, in this case, for us, Mojave County, has to pay that $39 million. And by the way, that's statewide in Arizona. We're by no means the worst government agency. The city of Prescott alone owes $81 million to PSPRS. And they're what, 20% the size of Mojave County? So we are in better shape than many, and this is a statewide problem. But the question is, how do we want to deal with this? Do we want to make minimum payments, as the current budget proposes, and pay $61 million in interest? Or do we want to do something more dramatic and more hurtful in the short term, but more beneficial in the long term? So I'm throwing that out there because that's my conversation with Ms. Lloyd, Mr. Spoot, Mr. Hendricks.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make a clarification through the finance director. This current budget, how much does it include for paying off PSPRS?
It has 0 in excess payments.
I just
but
wanted the board to hear that. So currently, the only thing that's included in this budget is the additional payments for PSPRS that we're required to pay, the additional contributions. But to pay off that $18 million or $20 million debt, this current budget does not include a dollar. Is that correct? Thank you.
Okay, if I could follow up to that, if I could, Mr. Chairman, because I was very fast and sloppy with my language because I'm talking about an issue that makes me very uncomfortable, which is how do we retire this massive debt? Because the tax word has to come and play a role in it. As I understand it, not only do we owe the 18, 19, 20 million, it's actually closer to 20, but they're still calculating that. We also owe 1.2 million in that 5-year period when the employees were paying more before it was unruled constitutional. We have to refund that money to people. So there's another debt buried in there. And one more. I got one.
There's 3.
3. Oh, you got Corp and you got EORP also. So there's multiple plans we have to do this. We are between a rock and a hard place, and we did not create that rock and a hard place. The good news, I want to give a silver lining here to folks. All this debt we're talking about is for employees hired 2011 and earlier. Employees hired from 2012 forward. We don't have this mess because they changed the pension plan. They figured out they made a huge mistake and they changed it for new hires, but we still have that bundle of tens of millions of dollars for the old hires to deal with. And I personally believe it's more fiscally prudent to deal with this, even if it means taxes, so we're not wasting taxpayer money on interest payments, because that's essentially, in my view, a 300% tax increase just for paying off that debt if we just leave it alone. So that's my view.
Thank you. Supervisor Angus.
Thank you. First, I'd like to say that I was disappointed that we didn't get a balanced budget presented to the board this year. Every year I've been a supervisor, we've been presented a balanced budget along with administration recommendations. This year, we were not given that opportunity. Last year, when we did our budget, there was a lot of talk about sales tax. We discussed it, and at the time, it had to do with bringing in more money for the general fund and the sheriff's department. I promised that I would keep that in my mind going forward. And over this past year, it's become hard to ignore that we have a huge problem in the sheriff's department. And this isn't a new problem. This is a problem that precedes most of the people on this board. But frankly, this board has kicked it down the road as well. I sat right there in that seat back before I was elected supervisor in 2011, and I listened to then Sheriff Tom Sheehan quite literally beg the board for money. He did a PowerPoint presentation, he did comparisons with other counties, and he predicted that if Mojave County did not get serious about compensating law enforcement, there would be dire consequences. Now, I'm not one to fall for government hyperbole, the sky is falling scenarios or threats, but we're in trouble. To me, the most important part of my job of any government jurisdiction is to protect its citizens. During the election, all the candidates spoke about the sheriff's pay and morale issues. It's common knowledge that Mojave County pays the least amount of money in, I believe, all 15 counties. We get new cadets, we train them, and they leave. That is not fiscally responsible. In a lot of cases, they don't even have to move because they're going to the local municipalities, Bullhead City, Kingman, and Lake Havasu City, who are more than happy to snatch, sorry, Mayor, who are more than happy to snatch them up and compensate them enough so they'll stay. Then there is the compression issue. We've heard about this, so there's no need to go on with that, but it's not going to get better on its own. And the other issue that we're hearing about that is another top priority for me is the money that we owe in the Public Safety Personal Retirement System, PSPRS, that we just heard about. We've been speaking about it for over a year and the fact that Mojave County owes over $20 million. We're mandated this year to pay out $1.2 million as part of that lawsuit that we just spoke about. And this 1.2 million is part of the $2.8 million shortfall we have heard about and is given as the reason for the 16-cent property tax hike. I will say up front, I will not vote for a property tax hike, period. We keep hearing that Mojave County is one of the lowest tax counties in Arizona, like that's a bad thing. But what is never included are those secondary taxing districts. When you put those in, the numbers climb. And this year's taxpayers from all over the county will see a tax increase even before we decide as a county what we want to do, because throughout the county there are school bonds, teacher overrides, fire bonds. It's never ending. And now we're talking about the roads. And our roads are a mess, can't deny it, but we continually work on them. And right now, as I said before, it's not high on my priority list. Again, since last year, I've been going around speaking in my district and around the county, telling people about our sheriff problem. And I don't know how when roads became the top priority. It's not what we talked about last year. In a perfect world, I'd like to be able to address all of it, but we can't. I can only support what I believe is the most important issue right now. And as a conservative, and it pains me to even talk about raising taxes, in my time here, I've never supported a tax increase. But I want to live in a county that's safe. I've been told that at any given time there are only 2 sheriff deputies in Fort Mojave, and that is unacceptable. They're working longer, grueling hours, and it's only a matter of time before they leave. We have a new Walmart opening up next month in Fort Mojave, and I've been informed by Bullhead City that there are approximately 5 arrests a day for shoplifting and all the things that go along with having a super Walmart in the county. We don't have the manpower to handle it. So here's my proposal. A 1/4-cent sales tax strictly for law enforcement. Sheriff Schuster was kind enough to put together a realistic budget that would fix the compression issue and enable him to hire about 20 officers quickly. I don't know if everyone's gotten it, but I will share it after the meeting. According to the documents we received from county administration, a 1/4-cent sales tax will bring in between $6 to $7 million per year. I propose a 1/4-cent sales tax strictly for law enforcement, with $4 million of it going to the sheriff's office. He said he could make our sheriff's department a first-class organization with that amount of money, and the rest of it being used to pay down our PSPRS obligation. And I'll even suggest something a little bigger and bolder. If we really seriously want to take control of our financial future and be fiscal conservatives, I would suggest that we pay the $20 million that we owe from our unrestricted funds, and then every year pay ourselves back with the excess money from the 1/4-cent sales tax. We'll save over $20 million in interest payments over the 20 years. Since this is a law enforcement liability, it will be paid out of the law enforcement budget. In effect, we would be floating the taxpayers an interest-free loan on a debt we have no choice in paying. This will satisfy current and future needs for several years in the public safety arena and will eliminate a tremendous debt and will provide better public safety and law enforcement services to our county residents on a 1/4-cent sales tax. With the $1.2 million being included in the law enforcement tax, the county shortfall would then be about $1.5 million. I believe we can cover that if we really look closely at some of our unrestricted funds and work again with the sheriff's office with some restructuring that will happen with this influx of money. Again, it's my philosophy. I don't believe we should go and increase property taxes and ask our citizens for money when we have money in funds acting like a savings account. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Angus.
Can I say something?
Supervisor Moss.
I want to thank Supervisor Angus for her comments, because I agree with them. If we can get 3 more votes, we can do that right now.
Yes, it would be interesting. Certainly, by addressing this indebtedness to our pension funds early on, purposely getting those balances down, it's absolutely ridiculous to finance over that long-term time. It's unfortunate that the pension funds were unfunded and not properly examined on at least a quarterly basis, but that's history. And I think by using a number of different avenues, we can address these. and I can certainly appreciate the quarter-cent sales tax for either that or the combination thereof. With that, we also face a number of other challenges as we go along. So I have a couple questions for our Finance Director, Ms. Lloyd, in a minute, but I'll first ask our Supervisor Johnson if you have any questions for Ms. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess the first question would be, usually we put in a $2 million in excess of what we need for future funds coming in, you know, something that's not budgeted, it's just there between now and the 31st when we do the final budget. Is there a $1 million, $2 million, something like that in the budget now?
Yes, sir. We have $5 million that it's unappropriated. So it's also unfunded. So if that is what you're looking to, we did increase that in the event that there were some items that came through that were significant decisions.
Okay, I guess I understand that. The only thing, other suggestions I would have would be that, and it's not really for Ms. Lloyd, it's more for the board, would be, you know, to maybe relook at the twice a month meetings and move back to one. I think that would save us an awful lot of time and free up a lot of staff time. And I think we might, it hasn't come back to the board yet, but it was something we want to include in this budget, giving the clerk of the board adequate resources to address getting our records brought back up to date. That's all I had, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Johnson. Supervisor Bishop.
Thank you, Supervisor Angus. There were some surprises in your speech, and they were pleasant surprises that I think I could live with, except I think we left out our probation people in the quarter-cent sales tax that you proposed. That was included? Yes. Okay, great. I like the idea of paying down the PSPRS as quickly as possible. I think that's a conservative way to look at that. In fact, speaking of conservatism, I hear all the time that Republicans, conservatives, don't raise taxes ever, 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 and that simply is not what I believe a conservative is. I believe a conservative is someone who is responsible with the revenues that they bring in this case to the county, and spends the monies wisely. I think I want to see this county continue to go forward. I want our sheriff to be able to run his department. I want the probation officers to be able to keep their people as well. It's kind of the same situation with them. And as far as the roads go, my support for the quarter-cent transportation tax is basically based on the fact that I didn't think we would get unanimous support from the board for any type of a sales tax. So I'm willing to go to the vote of the people to get that tax if we all don't agree with the quarter-cent sales tax or even a half-a-cent sales tax. I would support. And if we did that, we could lower property taxes, and I think all of our residents would really appreciate having their property tax lowered. So it just is good fiscal common sense to look at an excise tax, and I would support that with all my heart. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Supervisor Bishop. Supervisor Johnson.
One other thing I forgot to bring up was I think we need to look at one of our employees, Sonia Jaramillo in the Finance Department, and the comparison with her with other departments that do the same thing for a comp study too.
I agree. Director Lloyd, did you catch that from
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I have a couple questions for you, Ms. Lloyd. If we were to increase the excise tax, would it be possible to enact a 1/2 cent sales tax?
If you increase the excise tax?
No, I'm looking at a couple of variables here.
Okay.
Either a 1/2 cent sales tax or a quarter-cent sales tax? Is it possible to enact a half-cent sales tax for the purpose of reducing the indebtedness we have to the pensions?
No, because the existing quarter cent is a general excise tax. So if that had been voter approved for capital projects, then you could. But right now, we are already expending 1/4 of that.
Right, we're only allowed a half a cent, so we've already taken a quarter, we only have a quarter left,
That's
correct?
correct.
Okay. And that quarter-cent sales tax would generate how many dollars?
About $6.5 million.
Okay, so I'm looking at the math of Supervisor Moss, and it appears it's very good.
Is this
Problem
time to
with-
disclose I had a D all throughout high school in math class?
And I appreciate the comments and concerns and your input, Supervisor Angus. But I think we're leaving another item out, and I want to make sure that we're getting it correctly. There's also a current increase to the pension fund above what it was prior to this year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And how much is that?
So the rate increase, the county has to contribute up to 52.2% next year. The current year we're in, it's 42%. So we are receiving a 10% rate increase. That's over $600,000 alone just for the current contributions.
Okay, so we need to make sure that we add that other $500,000 into our numbers.
Yes. And
Because-
it is calculated currently within the budget.
Okay. But not in Supervisor Moss's calculations, correct? I just want to make sure that we're counting that other variable that's not being accounted for on the side.
And I understand, I appreciate that, thank you.
Okay. So, the numbers that I came up with, if we were to look at increasing property tax alone, you're indicating 16 cents just to balance the budget, correct? I had down, I think, 5 cents for the sheriff, and that was initiate how many dollars at 5 cents?
5 cents is about 700,000, 700 to 800,000.
Which is still way below what he needs.
Yes.
And I was looking at 1 cent for probation, which is way below what they need. And I'm still looking at 5 cents to complete the 5 cents to complete the courthouse project.
Okay.
Which is still way below what we need. And then we get back to funding the library, of which we were using those dollars to pull down the balance on that. I'm at 37 cents already. And at 37 cents, we're still not meeting the goal of satisfying all those requirements. So even if we do incorporate a quarter-cent sales tax, we'll initiate $6.5 billion. We still have to look at the possibility of increasing property taxes just to remain even. Is that correct?
As we currently are looking at it, yes.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that I had my thoughts straight. So,
If I could, Mr. Chairman?
certainly.
Okay. I appreciate Supervisor Angus's proposal, because I think that law enforcement, and when she says that's her primary concern, and I agree, because as of February, it was my primary concern, and now I have 3 equally primary concerns, but one of them is removed if we send the road tax to the voters. It's out of our hands at that point, and so the roads are out the picture. I'm not even thinking about those. It's in the, whether they say yes or no, it's a voter issue.
Right, it's on the side.
So that's gone. So now we have the pension debt and law enforcement. And those are my concerns. And I think there's other things in there that you suggested that we can talk about. But I think when it comes to our financial situation, if we have a sales tax, it's budgeted for a period of time with a sunset clause in there to deal with that pension debt, to deal with that sheriff's shorthandedness, to deal with the compression issues and probation. Between those two things, what I think Supervisor Angus is saying, that we take care of 2 out of the 3 big concerns sitting on our desk right now, with just the sales tax. The question is, before we even talk about it, we need to resolve it one way or the other. I'm okay with doing that in order to retire that pension debt, in order to get the sheriffs, the men, and the probation, the men and women that they need. But is it even worth discussing? Because of my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Esplin, but it's going to take a unanimous consent of the board to do that.
For the sales tax.
Okay. So are we allowed to ask if the board is, each board member, whether we're for it or against it?
Well, in a public meeting like this, we can talk about it.
I just want to make sure, because people complain every now and then. And so, Mr. Chairman, can we ask?
Certainly.
Because I'm for doing that for those 2 issues, law enforcement and pension debt. I'm for those issues with the sunset thing built into it, and we'd have to do the math to figure out how long that would be. But I don't know what the other board members think. I think Supervisor Angus might be, but I'd like to speak for herself.
If I just clarify, I just want to clarify something. First off, we do have to put it on an agenda if we're going to put it on a vote. And secondly, I would recommend that we not do a straw vote or anything like that. But we ought to we can at least talk about what the various positions would be and so forth. And then if you want to bring it back for a vote, then it would be a proper time to do a vote. Correct. It's not on the agenda to discuss.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to at least have our attorney reconsider that, because the purpose of this particular meeting is to discuss our budget, to be able to define what our budget is going to be, and that would either include or not include any other provisions such as the sales tax, because if we can't move forward with these items at this time, then we're not going to be moving forward with these items at all. So that's the purpose. That's why we agendize this meeting, is to be able to set the parameters that we're going to be moving forward with in this tentative budget approval process. So please ask for reconsideration on that.
Item 50 does say tax levies, so that's why I thought it was okay.
Right.
I wanted to check.
And I certainly believe it's germane to the issue. Supervisor Johnson, I believe that you were trying to initiate a conversation.
Yes, thank you. I think the county attorney covered it, but I disagree with part of his outcome. I believe it's not agendized for increasing the sales tax, and so as it wasn't agendized, it doesn't give the public chance to be there and participate. So if we're going to do, if that's something the board wants to agendize, we can agendize that for a later meeting, because I think it's going to take a lot more than just trying to hash out something to put on into the budget without consideration of all the debts we owe.
Okay, but I believe it is germane to the issue that we can discuss opportunities to meet our budget requirements. And we can discuss the quarter-cent sales tax to flesh out a number of issues. And speaking kind of out of the box, my thought on the quarter-cent sales tax was for the reduction of the pension fund completely. I hadn't considered putting in a portion for the sheriff or the probation, although I can most certainly consider that. I just don't know how the numbers would work out, because my concern is every year that we postpone paying off those pension demands creates a huge impact on the general fund at point certain. We need to find out where the sunset is, where the payoff is. So that's one of my concerns there. But I think we should probably, at some point in time, each of us discuss the pros and cons of that, and now's an ideal time as far as I'm concerned.
Sheriff to come down for a second.
Chairman Watson, Supervisor Angus.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, we talked about this, and I want to make sure I didn't misspeak, because I'm looking at this again, and I don't see anything about probation. So did you include probation?
I did not.
You
That
did
was,
not, okay.
They're beyond my privy.
I would
That was for the
apologize for
sheriff's
that.
office.
Okay.
Right, and if I could, I would love to clarify why I believe this is a solid plan, if that would be acceptable.
Certainly.
Okay. As you know, we are in dire straits, and I have been pulling my hair out. I'm losing sleep because I'm trying to fix a problem that occurred long before I took this position. It's getting epidemic. I have men and women working for me with 10-plus years of service who are telling me point blank, I'm loyal, I want to stay. If we can't get this fixed this year, we're leaving. Okay, so this is, we're at a breaking point. This should have been addressed many, many years ago, and it's water under the dam as far as I'm concerned, because we have to face the now. The way I see things, we have a $20 million public safety pension deficit. If I can get this board to cooperate and stand behind local law enforcement, because that's what the citizens are demanding, excuse me, I could have this auditorium filled right now with, just based on the phone calls I'm taking, demanding service that I can't provide in a timely fashion. The point being is, if we have this $20 million deficit, we pass a quarter-cent sales tax. $4 million of it goes into the sheriff's, the whole thing goes into the sheriff's office. $4 million is used to immediately fix compression. Money will be used to add staffing over a 3-year period and maintain the step compression that we're fixing, with earmarked $2 million. $2 million out of that out of that $6 million going directly towards the pension fund. But here's where it makes sense to me. We have $20 million as a county. Pay it off tomorrow. Okay, pay it off tomorrow, and then the $2 million that we're putting in is tax-free. We're simply paying back that fund. There's no interest involved in doing it that way. That's why I think it makes good sense, and I wanted to be able to share my thoughts with you.
The quarter cent right now in this economy is bringing in, but, the economy is changing. It's
Yes.
picking up, and, anecdotally, I'm hearing it, seeing it in the housing market. So we could actually get more. So, the 4 million, 2 million, 2.5, I mean, that, we could sort of play with those numbers a bit. I mean, I think you'd probably be happy with 3 million. I know that you could probably do a lot. I know you want 4 million, that's what I want for you. But I want us all to agree on it.
Absolutely, and I will say, I agree 100%, the economy is picking up. We're talking about a super Walmart. Now, last night at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm researching what the average Walmart sells nationwide, and you're talking over $60 million in sales every year. That's a significant chunk of sales tax coming, and that directly correlates with what service we're going to be required to provide. We don't have a lot of staffing down there. If it's an average of 5 calls a day, my goodness, we have problems. We're going to have problems dealing with that, because you have to understand the bigger picture is, if I have 2 deputies on or 3 deputies on, the county is very vast. And if there's a hot call for service down in Golden Shores, my deputies are tied up there, we're at least 30 minutes out, running lights and sirens to get to the next call. We have to have more staffing. Thank you.
So everything above 4 million, whether it's 2 million, could maybe as high as 3 million. Everything above that 4 million goes into paying down this debt.
Understand.
Okay.
Any further questions for the sheriff?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to have a clarification from Finance Department, because I think what the board is proposing is, just from an administrative standpoint, is a tremendous proposal. I think it would allow us to pay off our largest liability quicker, the PSPRS liability, instead of throwing $800,000 and paying it for it over 20 years. It would throw a couple million, $2.5 million at it, and it would cut that liability significantly. Plus, it would limit the interest that we would be paying, throwing away on this proposal, and it'd make the sheriff's office whole, which I think safety is from what we heard at the budget process, our number one, either the number one or one of our top 2 priorities. I'd say it's number 1 priority. But with that said, I'd have to turn to our finance director and say, on the second half of that discussion, that do we have $20 million to pay off anything? And she'll say, Mike, if we borrow it, we probably do. That would be a question to me, because I have to turn to Ms. Lloyd and say, I don't want to give the board any false expectations at all. Do we have $20 million anywhere? And would that jeopardize our ability to pay warrants throughout the year?
Yeah, what we have, I had updated all of you and emailed you an updated tentative budget end-of-year fund balances about 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, I think. Essentially, as we started off the program, we'll have about $19.5 million in the general fund. Most of the funds are restricted outside of the general fund. We will have $7.5 million in the road fund. You're restricted. You may not borrow against that or use anything against that. The flood control funds have been spoken for and are allocated back out to the cities. The TV district, we anticipate they would have about $1.3 million, and again, that's district money. That would have to be, if you borrowed against that, they still have to pay TV district bills, so we would have to retain 90 days of cash flow going into that. In each case, the funds are not there, that we've got those set aside.
And sometimes you ask the question that you know the answer to. But what Coral is telling you in that $20 million from the fund balance to pay off that PSPRS immediately, even though it's not there, that's not a deal killer. This is a fantastic proposal from an administrative standpoint, and being able to lessen our liability significantly without that one time being able to pay it off and then paying us back, even if we can't do that. So.
And I should add, I guess, that to that, there always is an opportunity to actually borrow $20 million to pay it down and borrow at a lower rate than what we're being charged by PSPRS.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
Yeah, Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you for Ms. Lloyd. This $19.5 million that you referenced, that is operating revenue?
That's correct.
And what does that operating revenue cover right now?
So right now, we have about $6 million that we pay monthly on our $80 million budget for the general fund. So we have to pay that July, August, September, October to carry us through until we receive taxes. So we're looking at between, minimally 18 million just to pay our bills, plus we've allocated a $2 million real funded contingency for the board in the event that something occurs during the year. We have a tax settlement, that we have litigation and things like that. So that's what that amount of money is reserved for.
So how would that affect our ability to pay bills?
That's a very direct way of saying that's exactly what I meant, was that you don't want to get to the position where you're preventing yourself from paying your monthly bills.
Okay, and then we keep talking $20 million. I think Supervisor Moss mentioned our debt load is $39 million. We're ignoring the other $19 million?
Well, we're stuck really with that. The remaining $19 million is on the elected officials system. And as the administrator for PSPRS advises that we need to be prepared to save for that, but he advised us to not actually pay it because we would be paying down the debt for everyone. So he said, be prepared that they're seeking legislative change to increase the contribution rate, and we will effectively be paying our portion at that point. So he was looking, I believe, the last I heard last week was that they were anticipating that those changes would occur this year.
Yeah, well, it's obvious that he wants us to pay off our debt, and he doesn't care about the other debt that's owed on the elected officials. Those are the only questions I have. Okay. Thank you.
Can I follow up, Mr.
Thank you, Supervisor Johnson. Supervisor Moss.
Yeah, it's $20 million to PSPRS, it's $19 million for the EURP, the elected officials, and that's all from the 2011 and earlier groupings. My understanding is, and because of interest of time, maybe I didn't want to get into these details, but I guess it's out there, so I go through it now. Mr. Smoot recommended that we get that $19 million together into a fund, and as soon as the state determines what our portion of the pie is, have the money to write a check immediately, but not write checks on a payment plan right now, because under the current system, until it gets fixed, we're reducing the entire debt load statewide, and we're not going to get any additional credit for it. So gather the money, and as soon as our obligation is set in stone, write the check, but not until that time, for the one pension, not the other.
Right.
Because one, we know exactly what our obligation is. The other, we know the principal, but the exact repayment terms are still floating out there.
Correct. Correct. Any further questions for the sheriff?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I can make a suggestion, it might be premature, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly, go ahead.
Right now, and this is me looking into the future a little bit, it may be that we're not currently in a position to discuss this budget, but I think we have two potential budgets that we need to be discussing. One is funding some of these debts via sales tax, and the other budget is funding these debts via property tax. And which way the board has to go depends basically on the will of each and every board member at this point in time. And so I think we need to have two budgets in front of us, one that does it this way and the other which does it the other way. And perhaps at the end of the discussion, we come in the middle someplace. But I don't know if we have anything that we can actually vote on, if I'm understanding where we're at for discussion purposes, because I'd like to retire most of this debt via sales tax, if we can. So, and can I follow up on one other thing with Ms. Lloyd? I want to make sure, I think I interpreted your answer, and I know it correctly, and I knew it before, but I want to say it again so people understand our 18 or 19 million in our fund balance for the general fund. That's because we go 3 months without collecting any tax revenue, and we have to write checks, $6 million a month out of those savings.
Correct.
And then we pay it back, and we repeat the process each and every year.
Yes.
Okay, all right. That was my translation. Okay, are there other fund balances which are unrestricted that we can do what Supervisor Angus is mentioning in whole or in part, or is this maybe something that you would have to do a written report to us on in the near future?
You know, we've talked about fund balances over quite a bit over the last couple of years, and we do have written policies on supporting what the balances are in each of those. And I have a very good understanding, I believe, of what we actually, have in the bank. We would total about $85 million, if you will. But most of those are restricted. For example, we've got $10.4 million that we're expecting to retain for the court project into 18, once we pay off the jail. We would have, in the health insurance fund, for example, about8.5 million. So once you start whittling away the restricted funds, then you end up with working capital, with the 3 or 4 months balances, with what to pay the bills, if you will. The one area that may be different is the library building fund. That is not, but that's not general fund. That has nothing to do with PSPRS. If we borrowed that money to pay it back, that's an option. I'm not sure of the legal purview of borrowing other district building fund money in order to pay back over a period of time.
I'm throwing it out there because I think that's something we need to explore.
Okay.
In addition to potentially, if we have to finance this debt, let's do it at a lesser rate. So what's via a bank loan? If we can get First National Bank to give us a loan at 5%, it's better than 7.4%. But anyways, thank you. So I don't know which way to go because I'm interpreting some comments here that we're kind of paralyzed. We are a tale of two budgets, and which way are we going to jump?
Chairman Watson?
Supervisor Bishop?
I think that during this conversation, it should be at least brought up for discussion and find out if there's any interest or if it would help any if we extended the quarter-cent capital improvement tax for 1 year. That would raise another $6.5 million. That would get the Superior Court building completed, and then go ahead and let it sunset 1 year later. I don't know if there's if the board would entertain doing that, but that would certainly take $6.5 million out of this new quarter-cent tax if that got approved, or other liabilities. So I just wanted to throw that out and make sure it was part of the conversation.
Ms. Lloyd, do you want to address that? Ms. Lloyd, you want to address that?
Thank you.
I really didn't hear that. You could do that with, it would have to take a unanimous vote of the board, and yes, that's correct. That would be enough to provide the balance of what we anticipate, and would be able to completely fund that and not have that tail into any of the other discussion.
Okay, in fact, if we extended that for 2 years, then we could finish the courthouse, we could do the sheriff's substation in Lake Havasu, and we could do the morgue. So we
correct.
extend it a year, we do the courthouse, we extend it 2 years, let it sunset, we do all of the capital improvements that we need, and we're done with it. Is that correct?
I believe so. I would have to run down again the list of the parameters for the cost for the anticipated, the sheriff's substation, the morgue, and the animal control, but I believe
And
it was in
animal
that
control.
range.
Yeah. I was thinking it, I just didn't say that, so.
I mean, we have some other issues that are, going to be coming up as well, and I know that you've heard me say this over and over and over, but once the jail is paid off, then we're going to have to address.
Maintenance.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, thank you. It appears to me that we can make a couple of movements now to further clarify our direction. If there's any interest in pursuing a quarter-cent sales tax, that requires a unanimous vote of the board. There are probably a number of issues that are combined with that, but I'm going to be asking Supervisor Johnson if he has any interest in going further with those discussions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm the only person left that actually voted to put that quarter-cent sales tax in.
That's
when
correct.
I voted to put it in I gave my word to the public that I would sunset that in 20 years, and that's what I continue to do. I'm not going to break the word that I gave to the public on extending a quarter-cent sales tax. I think the problem we're in today, and I agree with Supervisor Angus that in my 20 years, I can't recall ever having a budget proposed to me that had property tax increases in it. They would always say, this is how much money we have, and in order to continue with the money that we have to cut 5% or 10%. This is how we're going to give the services. And then it was up to the board to decide, well, we need to increase property tax or some other form of revenue to increase the services or to keep the services at the same level. Also, this is the earliest I have ever seen. July is usually when we do our prelim budgets. And I think that's why we're in the predicament we are today, because we haven't had a decent enough time to have these discussions ahead of time with finance to find out exactly where we should be going. So I think that's why we're just shooting from the hip today. But that's my opinion, Mr. Chair. It's not that I'm opposed to a tax increase to get things done, but I think we need to have a debate upon that issue to pay off this debt. Should be something separate.
I guess my question to you, Supervisor Johnson, is do you have any interest in the quarter-percent sales tax versus going in the direction of property taxes?
I have ideas that I would like to bring forward to the board, but I think it's like every person on the board has mentioned, is the debt has to be paid no matter what. That's the most important thing hanging over our head. But I think that would take a separate meeting to discuss that, and then we could decide on, how you want to fund the other departments.
Thank you. That gives me a little bit more clarification. I appreciate the honesty of your answer. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, when it comes to law enforcement, I call it the sheriff and the probation. I lump them into law enforcement when I use that term. When it comes to the pension debt, when it comes to a couple of these other issues we've been discussing, this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, County Administrator Hendricks, this is an early date for the preliminary budget. Is that correct? Is that a correct statement?
It's early for Mojave County. It isn't early for anyone else.
Okay, all right, but we're a bit, from our speed, we're a bit ahead of ourselves. And maybe whether it's this coming meeting or the following meeting or whatever the pleasure of the chairman is, and whatever time the staff can get this, maybe we should have a debate on these debts, the method of payment, because apparently the agenda item isn't sufficient. And we can talk about budget A, sales tax, budget B, property tax, budget C, no tax, and budget D, something the board crams together. Yeah, right, so it's from all those three options. Is it possible to prepare at least this budget analysis, this short form that you attach to item 50 with those three versions?
Sure, absolutely.
So whenever maybe we should continue this with a modified agenda item, which opens up the universe of discussions to the earliest convenient date. We can have three different versions of this, and then the board can tell you the fourth version that we're good with. That's in the form of a motion, by the way.
I'm glad I don't have to repeat that one.
That's why we pay Jenny the big bucks. To clarify, I'd like to move that we continue item 50 of the agenda to have it further expanded to discuss all revenue and expenditure issues, all possible revenue and expenditure issues, and that we direct staff to come to us with three different budgets, one which would have a sales tax increase along the lines of what the board has discussed, another which would have a property tax increase along the lines of what the board has discussed, a third which would have no tax increase along the lines of what the board discussed, and finally, keeping in mind that when we have this meeting, the board's probably going to hand you a fourth budget that we want to actually do. But then we'd have three data points that we can compare and debate.
That would include the discussion of revenue also.
Yes, revenue and expenditures.
Mr.
And we have a
Chairman,
second.
before you make a vote,
Yes.
may I? To comply literally with what this motion is, what we've been doing in administration and not we, what my predecessors have been doing is reducing the budget in County Administration General Fund since 2008. And we've reached a point, we believe, that there is no other areas to reduce. We ask everybody to hold the line on the existing budget that they had last year and propose no increase in this year. In fact, we've been looking for decreases. With that said, we've experienced the additional $1.2 million that's required to pay our additional contribution, not our debt, but our additional contribution to PSPRS. We've hit, what was it, $500,000 to $600,000 for indigent defense. And then the remainder, we've got expected building expenses and other expenses that make up that $2.8 million that we're asking, that we've included in the budget that were additional expenses. What that would equate to is eliminating HR, administration, and finance, those departments. So when you ask to bring back a balanced budget with no tax increase, to be able to do that expeditiously, we would be looking at employee layoffs and other things. Quite frankly, I would have to say, all right, pick a percentage across the board for all general fund departments, including courts, and this is what you would have to expect to reduce that funding to bring a no tax increase budget to the board, just so you're aware of that. We can certainly do that.
If I can respond. I think I've heard at least two supervisors say they wanted to see a new no tax increase budget. And I don't want to tell you how to do that because you and Coral and the other department heads are the guys who we pay to do, bring these proposals back. But I'm looking at, for example, we're paying $4.5 million to the sheriff's department via these tax increases. Back them out. I mean, that's just a suggestion. I'm not going to vote to leave the sheriff hanging, but if we have to have a balanced budget, look at our spending priorities in here and back them out, get us back to zero, and that way we'll at least have that third data point. and then we can add them back in as we figure out what the revenue sources are to do that.
That sounds a lot like zero-based budgeting.
My goodness. So, but, so whatever, whether it's 5% across the board, whether it's backing out the increases, however you want to do it, I want to maximize.
The increases aren't included in the budget.
Okay.
Those increases aren't included. It would be taking everybody's zero-based budget and saying, okay, we're going to be cutting you a certain amount, and that's what we're going to be presenting.
However you think it needs to be
That's fine.
done, we probably need those 3 data points so that all supervisors' concerns are being addressed.
We can certainly provide that.
So if that required a 20% reduction in each one of the departments, that's what you would probably show. Is that correct? Like 2.8 million, something like that? Yeah, okay. So are you clear on our proposal? Okay, very good.
I think it was seconded the motion too, and I think, was my clarification okay for you?
I only have one question, and that would be, I missed it if you did, but did you set a date that you want it to come back, or are you leaving that open-ended?
I'm going to let the chairman, the county administrator, and Ms. Lloyd figure out what that date is.
Is that possible that be done at the next meeting?
Mr. Chair?
Supervisor Johnson?
I think obviously the sticking point is going to be on sales tax. If that was something to look at, maybe at the next meeting we could just discuss the paying down of the debt and make that one thing instead of having. I mean, Ms. Lloyd and them. I don't want to have them put together now 4 budgets for us, and then we have a meeting on how to pay down the debt, and there's no, we got 5 different proposals, and so we're never going to get anything done. So maybe we should decide on, we had a meeting to say, okay, how are we going to pay down this debt? What do you like to do? 20 years, 30 years, finance it, whatever, and then decide from there. And then that would give them, say, okay, here's the only chance you have. Either cut the 10 or 20% out of our budget, or we increase, property tax or however else we want to do it. But I think to be fair to the finance, it's kind of, they're just dealing in fantasy right now until the board says, yeah, we want to pay off this debt, or whatever the majority of the board wants to do.
I'd be glad to add that to an agenda item, but I still think that we need to have a good look at what we do in addition to.
I will leave it to the pleasure of the board, because you can bring back what I just said anytime you want. So the next meeting, for certainty, we can talk about Supervisor Johnson's discussion on paying down the debt, which I agree with him, we need to have that discussion.
Right.
And whether what I propose is after that on the agenda or at some subsequent meeting, I'll leave to you guys.
Well, my thought was to do as an action item what was suggested by Supervisor Johnson first, then followed up by your motion at the next meeting.
I'm good with that.
No, both on July 19th.
June 19th or July 19th?
I'm sorry, June 19th.
Okay.
For the budget?
Any further questions? There being none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Ms. Lloyd. You have your homework assignment for the week, for the next 2 weeks. 3 days, 4 days, 4 days this week. There you go. I'm sure we can give you plenty of latitude.
I need to lose about 40 pounds.
Okay, on to item number 51, discussion, possible action, the investigation of Mr. Victor Riccardi's compliance with HB 1387, and number 2, the Mojave County Fire District Chief's compliance with HB 1387, and number 3, the County Fire District Board members' compliance with HB 1387. Mr. Esplin, I believe you would be best to open this discussion.
I can go ahead and start the discussion. I believe the board has the backup material that I provided. I'll go in reverse. First off, the board has asked a couple different couple different items of the county attorney's office. One is to investigate the complaint that was lodged against Mr. Victor Riccardi, whether he complied with the statutory requirements in ARS 48-803. The other two directives from the board was to determine compliance from the current current fire district board members in the county, and the third was to determine compliance by the fire chiefs in the county with ARS 48-803. And so I'll go in reverse. First off, the compliance component by the fire chiefs and the fire district boards. Based on my investigation and the information that I found, there's not there's not a single fire district board member who is out of compliance with the requirements of ARS 48-803. So if you look at all the various different fire districts here in Mojave County, all of the board members have complied. That also includes the fire chiefs as well. There's not a single fire chief that is out of compliance, and that really speaks well to the fire district boards in our county. It speaks to our fire chiefs. There are some fire chiefs that haven't completed the training yet, but that's only because they just got hired as the fire chief for their particular fire district. There's a few that just within the last month or two were appointed. So they'll have a year to complete it. And there's a few other ones that still have a couple months that they have to complete their training, but assuming they complete it within that time, then they can do that. Now, addressing the investigation into Mr. Victor Riccardi and whether he complied or not. The complaint alleged that he did not do that within 1 year. The information that we obtained was he says that he did. The information from the Fire District Association that does the training shows that the record that he did not. Upon being notified by the board that I was investigating this, I met with Mr. Riccardi. He showed to me, he provided an affidavit to me saying that he did comply and that he had a witness statement saying that he did. Again, our records show that it did not. But from our perspective, we wanted to make sure, when I say we, the county attorney's office wanted to make sure that he did the training, that he complied with the training. And so recently, I believe in April of this year, he completed the training. His position is that this is the second time that he's completed the training. Whether that's true or not, that's for anybody to decide. But in any event, we believe, or the county attorney's position is that because he has now completed it, we are not going to pursue filing any kind of complaint in the Superior Court. I certainly open it up to your questions, comments, and thoughts about this.
Thank you, Mr. Esplin. I know Supervisor Bishop may have a question or two, but I certainly do.
I don't know if I have any questions, but I have some comments. It bothers me that Vic Riccardi was in front of this board, and it appears that he misrepresented the truth. And I take quite an offense to that. He apparently knew that he hadn't complied with this training, and he had an opportunity to give us that proof if he had it, and he did not. In fact, he didn't comply within the 1 year of being elected, and furthermore, he hadn't complied in numerous years of several elections. So I take great offense in that, and it concerns me that he has embarrassed the departments countywide and caused us to do this investigation. We did the investigation and found that he was not in compliance, and then we're going to erase it just because he took an internet class, which he may or may not have taken. There was Mr. Eder was with him in the room when he took it, from what I've been told, and one of the other board members was in the room when he was taking it. So I don't know whether he took the exam or someone took it for him. I don't think it really matters, but I'd like to see this matter go forward and have it decided in the Superior Court. That would be my desire.
One thing that we considered was the language of the statute and the purpose of the statute. According to the language of the statute, it's referred to the county attorney's office to ensure compliance or to take appropriate action to ensure compliance. And so we felt that now that he has done it, albeit for many of the reasons, the concerns that you had, whether it was online and he didn't really pay attention or whatnot, but it has been certified that he has done now, he has completed it. And so we felt that we were able to ensure his compliance and be able to take the action necessary to get the compliance. The one thing that I'll say about this, and I think this is a credit to the board and also to the fire districts and the fire chiefs in Mojave County, is that this has put everybody on notice that you take this serious. You do take this serious, and this is something that should be done. And this will serve as a notice to future ones that the next person who tries to do this, maybe the county attorney will take the different position and say, no, now that you know, we will not do this again, and we will prosecute you for this, or whatever it may be. But I think this has served notice to all the fire district boards that this is a serious matter, and everyone has done it, with the exception we were unable to verify with Mr. Riccardi.
I agree with that, but you know, there are some other circumstances that predate this, like the open meeting law violations that he's been involved with, and now I understand there's a conflict of interest investigation going forward involving the fire department. So it's just one thing after another with this particular gentleman, and I don't know, I'd like to see it go forward and have it adjudicated in a court. That's just my feeling.
Thank you, Supervisor Bishop, and I share that feeling. Had Mr. Riccardi taken the class, I think he would have understood the concept of conflict of interest. I understand that there is currently an investigation of the possibility of breaking that golden rule that we have, as board members, serve our public. So, at the very least, if we can't proceed with an action on questioning the veracity of his ability to pass this test, or his quote, graduation of this test, it would be interesting if a judge would ask him a question or two of the documents that are involved in that certification. I guess I would throw that as a challenge. But it's certainly, if that's not going to occur, I would really want to stress the investigation and the conflict of interest, because that serves the entirety of all the elected officials out there and all the voters. Each member of those districts, we all invest our trust in people that represent us on those boards. I think when we see in a situation like this where a board member is flagrantly thumbing his nose at everybody else, it's a bad day. So with that, I guess the decision lands in your hands, I suppose, but I'm making a strong recommendation that we continue to look into it, and I would challenge the judge to say, ask him a couple of questions on the test.
Do you have any speakers on this?
We have two speakers.
If I could, Chairman Watson.
Supervisor.
I understand the frustration, Supervisor Bishop and yourself, Supervisor Watson, but I think we had this discussion the last meeting when the statute was in front of us, and I think the county attorney's position is correct. The issue is to ensure compliance. And I will tell you that when I was a child, I sat in many classrooms where I didn't pay attention to a darn thing that was being said, and so whether it's in person or via internet, you can't make a person hear who doesn't want to listen. And the law only requires them to do what needs to be done to get the certificate. And I think we'd be wasting our time and money if we continued forward. I want to think the county attorney's done a great job. Though I do understand your concerns, I don't think the law is written that way. That's my personal opinion.
Well, I'm sure when you were going to school that nobody else took the test for you.
I somehow muddled on through it.
We do have two people that would like to speak to the issue. Mr. Martin?
I was just going to address...
Mr. Schultman?
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Chairman Watson, is the ultimate decision, it has been made, and I don't think that the county attorney's office is willing to revisit that for the reasons that have been stated, and I don't dispute some of the, I simply don't know. There's other allegations, but we certainly can't, the county attorney's office certainly can't cure other ills through this mechanism. If there are other complaints, those will be evaluated independently and investigated independently, and there are mechanisms for those violations. But it is, Mr. Esplin did do a great job. There has been a lot of public input. There has been kind of a resurface of this issue. It has been an important issue that these citizens have brought to the board's attention. And this is, again, for their edification, the citizens did what they could discretionary, the board did what they did discretionary, and then we made the decision that no, we're not going to proceed with this because he has complied. And like Supervisor Moss indicated, I also believe if we filed this action, my experience with the courts would be is that they would also look at this as compliance has been ensured. And you also have this issue as far as, economies and resources and pursuing a case like this where you have someone who says, yes, I was there, and someone else saying, yes, I saw him there, perhaps he didn't sign in, and that same person saying, I know I also took this in 2016, and when I called to confirm, they didn't have my records for 2016, they put other issues at jeopardy. Whether the veracity of all that is correct or not is a secondary issue, but I think the main one is ensured compliance. And I think that now that this has come to the forefront, like Mr. Esplin said, if other board members do not do this, certainly this is on people's minds. This will be brought quicker to the board's attention, quicker to our attention, and compliance will be much timelier than we saw in this case. And I can certainly take any other questions the board has.
Thank you, Ms. Shelton.
Mr. Schottman, can you confirm or deny that there is an ongoing investigation now on the conflict of interest situation?
I can confirm that the county attorney's office has been made aware, and that we have taken that on as far as that citizen complaint. And to the extent of the investigation, I will not comment on that. But yes, we have received that complaint, and that is a complaint that our office would investigate. Not that the sheriff's office could not do that; it would technically be their jurisdiction. But historically, when this issue comes up, our office does have a few investigators within our office. One is a sworn peace officer, and so these kind of hybrid, kind of criminal yet general government issues, investigations, we do take those complaints, and there is. We are looking into that at this time, but I can't comment any further than that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shelton. Mr. Martin, if you could please.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask Mr. Feldman a question?
I'm sorry. Yes, Supervisor Johnson.
As much as I hate to agree with Mr. Schottman or any other attorney, I have to say that I believe that any judge we've gone to, or not our board, but statewide, once they comply, even if they comply after the fact, they consider that handled. So I think we're probably, I know the frustration like everybody else has, but I think it would be a moot point to take it to court.
And I agree with Supervisor Johnson. I think that the time and effort would be go through that, and his cases, as you know, and everybody knows, criminal, civil, a lot of those get resolved, and when you get what you're looking for at the outset, a lot of times there's the splitting of the baby that some people don't like, but I think in this case it would go through that process, and at worst it'd be, say, hey, a tongue lashing and perhaps, but again, one of the other considerations, just and for sake of time, is not that this is not a serious issue, but because of one of the considerations too is the county attorney's office takes very doesn't take lightly the fact that this is an elected official, and also, and not that they're protected or insulated or anything like that, but we do not want to get involved where now everybody is video cameraing the next session that goes out, and say 2 fire chiefs and 4 board members from various fire districts across the the county go out and they take a smoke break and they're gone 20 minutes or 30 minutes, and then all of a sudden everybody's running to you saying, hey, they didn't get technically 6 hours. And, you know, we can't, the county attorney's office can't be used as far as, hey, we need to get this guy out because he does a lot of bad things. And that's something we take, it was a slight consideration in this, but mostly what Mr. Moss hit on is that simply we ensured compliance, and that was actually done through the citizen complaints. They're the ones that ensured the compliance by bringing this to the board's action, and they're the ones to be thanked for the progress that has been made. That hopefully answer your question, Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, please state your name and address for the record.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and Honorable Supervisors. I'm Ted Martin, 4020 North Guthrie in Golden Valley. I'm here to say that I can agree with the findings of the county attorney and can be satisfied with that. But when I look at the whole situation, this was a person that snubbed his nose at that law of compliance. And it didn't come down to compliance until someone put the finger on him to make them do it. And if there's anybody that should be held accountable, that should be the person that should be held accountable. And when you look back in the history, this board was pushed in a position to have the board that he sat on administer a district that their governance failed. So out of a glaring example that was in front of him, that should have been the one. And he still thumbed his nose and said, I'm too good for this. I have a history of knowing everything that I need to know of what my position is, and I'm not going to comply. So it wasn't until someone got to the point where things added up that we have to push to make him comply. So I think you should make him accountable. And I stood up here before and said, anybody that isn't, they should be held accountable. My feelings haven't changed. He's been the example that he put himself as an example, so make an example of him and hold him accountable for his actions. And that's what I request. So thank you for doing your investigation. You've done a great job. You can tell everybody else is doing it right. And, he thumbed his nose at us and said, no, I'm above that, until you made him humble, and then you brought him down. So I just ask that you make him accountable for his actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Christopher Simpson. Mr. Simpson, if you'll please give us your name, address for the record.
I'm Chris Simpson. I reside at 3590 North Benton Street in Kingman, Arizona. I'm here representing not only the professional firefighters of Kingman, but also the professional firefighters of Arizona. While this has been kind of a landmark issue, as Mr. Esplin can attest to, I have to explicitly disagree with the letter that I read from Mr. Esplin, in the sense that compliance is the key. Compliance is not the key when the law explicitly states that they have 1 year to get it done, not 4 years to get it done. So now we're sitting in a situation where we go, oh, okay, well, the next fire district, maybe we run into an issue with NACFED that we had up in Dolan Springs. What if one of their board members wasn't compliant and they go back into bankruptcy again, or something to that effect? I have to attest to the fact that if I went to work one day and because I didn't do my training, I lost my emergency medical certification, right? I would be fired, not given a, well, okay, but you got it done 2 years later or 3 years later. I would be fired that day, that I didn't come into work with my certifications because I didn't do my training. Why are we going to allow this individual to not be set as an example for the rest of the county, for the rest of the state, to ensure compliance with the law forever? I mean, that's where I stand with it. I believe he should be fired or removed from his position. I say fired because I just use fired, but I believe he should be removed from his position and replaced with someone who has already complied with that state mandate. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Zippin.
Thank you.
I believe at this point, item 51, direction and action have already been taken. Would that be correct? So we'll move on to item 52. Discussion, possible action, discussion with the attorney of the public body pursuant to ARS 38-431, portions A, 3, and 4, to consider the county's position and instruct its attorney regarding complaints filed against Mojave County Elections Department and the proposed settlement.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve item 52 upon the terms discussed, and that we, to clarify, instruct the chairman of the board would sign any settlement documents.
And I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Questions? There being none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed? Motion carried. Item 53, discussion, possible action, authorize the chairman of the board to sign a letter to the U.S. Department of Interior on behalf of the board voicing the board's position on monument designations under the Antiquities Act of 1906. Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have in backup a proposed resolution just to give you a working document if it's something the board wants to go forward with.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve item 53 of the agenda.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve item 53. Any further questions? There being none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Item number 54, discussion and possible action, authorize the chairman of the board to sign a letter to the U.S. Department of Interior on behalf of the board requesting the agency to take a look at the 2012 uranium mining withdrawal near the Arizona Strip. Again, thank you, Supervisor Johnson, for bringing this forth.
Thank you.
Any questions for Supervisor Johnson?
None. Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve item 54 of the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and second for the approval of item 54. Any further discussion? There being none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Item number 55, discussion, possible action regarding the request of staff to provide additional information regarding nighttime road work presented by Supervisor Moss.
It was more of an inquiry, and to get it out there in the public, because I've received, and maybe Mr. Latowski, if he's still available, could answer this question. Because I've received multiple business complaints that we're doing work during the working days on the roads, and we're shutting down access to their roads, or to their businesses to do that. And they ask, why don't we do this work at night? And I got to the point where I had received, I think, 4 of these inquiries, which I've dealt with Mr. Latowski. I think the public needs to hear it as to what goes into the decision to do work at night versus the day. And what do we do to ensure business access to their businesses during our time at work during the day?
Chairman Watson, Supervisor Moss, excellent question, and really it comes down to more of a project-specific approach by which we engage, and there's always room for improvement toward engaging businesses early and often, and we have taken away some excellent successes from our most recent, very prominent projects, namely the Sacramento Wash Bridge construction, as well as the roundabout project in the Golden Shores. With regard to the county performing road work, what we do see is about only 150 of our 800 miles of paved road actually are largely outside of residential areas. So we obviously understand the perils of night work and the impacts on residential areas. And otherwise, some other standout items include just less visibility, less room for road work zone safety as it pertains to managing a work zone. Our largely rural 2-lane highways and roadways are set up such that they're largely not lit, and may not necessarily conjure the driver expectation, having to slow or stop upon approach to a work zone. And then there are certain materials, sometimes it works out to the benefit during the summertime, but oftentimes it does not. Some complications with regard to material placement, namely asphalt and concrete, but namely our asphalt work during the overnight hours in the winter, early spring, and late fall months. Simply the temperatures aren't very conducive to us performing that work. So there's a myriad of issues as it relates to county performance of road work at night. As it pertains to overnight work in contract road work, namely some of the big projects that we've undertaken, I think we set an example actually for the nation on how to do it the most efficient way through Sacramento Wash Bridge, where we did the 96-hour hard closure, and our contractor, Police Construction, did a masterful job of carrying out that work of placing a prefabricated bridge.
So if I can paraphrase your comments, Mr. Lotowski, essentially, if the county's performing the road work, which is generally repair or maintenance, we don't do nighttime work because of safety and placement and other issues. And that will sometimes necessitate for short periods of time a business closure, at least access to their business via road. But when we contract it out, we can impose upon them a condition that they do nighttime work, and frequently do.
Supervisor Moss, under contract work, we certainly can negotiate a contract in a manner that is most advantageous for the prosecution of that work with minimal impact to the area. It may warrant additional cost considerations, but nonetheless, it'd be a project by project.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor Johnson.
I don't know if Supervisor Moss want to do it or not, but I've had these same concerns, and it's been brought up to previous boards, and I would like to see it not so much just for nighttime work, but and they've made it hard on the county because we actually have such small limits on the amount of work we can do with our people, plus we have the limitations of staff. But on contracts, maybe we could bring it back if the board wants to see about having all of our contracts be a 24-hour workday, because I'd rather put up with, and I think the regular public would, with one day of noise in front of your place and then move on down, make a shorter period of time, and then we put in the bonus or whatever when they finish on time, and take away money at the end, if that's something we'd want to discuss as a board.
I think it's worthy of future discussion, and I would suggest that I think Mr. Johnson and I are on the same page with a lot of this stuff.
Very good. Well, then, would you like to bring that item back at some point, or
I would like the
staff?
engineering department, when they're able to present something to us, to bring it back, especially when it comes, I'm not talking about remote areas, but when it comes to places in front of operating Mojave County businesses. Those are the guys who pay our taxes, and I think they're understandably resentful when we shut them down.
Right.
So,
Is this an instruction to staff then, or in a motion for?
I'd make a motion that the staff analyze this and come up with proposals to present to the board at a later date.
Okay, I'll second it.
And we have a second? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? There being none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carried unanimously. I believe that brings us to the end of our agenda.
Motion to adjourn?
So we have a motion to adjourn, and I'd like to remind everybody that we have the presentation of the Citizens Animal Shelter Needs Assessment Committee presentation to this board following a 30-minute break. Would that be long enough for everyone?
Well, how about the people who've been waiting?
Good for me.
Would 30 minutes be inconvenient to the presenters? That'd be okay? Okay, 30 minutes. Meeting adjourned.